In a frontier town where rules were written by men who never built a damn thing, one woman refused to break. A baker with flour on her hands and fire in her chest, an Apache blacksmith with secrets carved into his silence. 6 months. One impossible contract, a marriage built on lies, tested by gossip, and burned down by truth. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The door slammed so hard the window glass rattled in its frame. Ruby Calder stood in the center of her bakery, hands white-knuckled around the letter, breath coming fast and shallow like she'd just run miles instead of standing still. The words blurred together, then sharpened, then blurred again. She read them a fourth time, hoping they'd change. They didn't. Pursuant to Territorial Property Act, Section 14, unmarried women over the age of 25 are ineligible to maintain independent business ownership. You have 60 days to comply or forfeit all holdings. 60 days. She'd built this place with her own hands, every board, every nail, every burn scar on her forearms, from learning how to work the temperamental oven her father left behind. The building wasn't much. Narrow storefront, 2 rooms in back, a chimney that leaked smoke when the wind came from the east. But it was hers. The only thing in this godforsaken town that belonged to her and nobody else. Now, some pencil pusher in a territorial office 300 miles away decided it didn't count. Ruby crumpled the letter and hurled it across the room. It bounced off a flour sack and landed in a sad little heap near the door. Didn't even make a satisfying sound. "Bastards," she whispered. Then louder, "Bastards!" The word echoed in the empty bakery. Through the front window, she could see Main Street going about its business, wagons creaking past, men in dusty boots heading toward the saloon, Mrs. Chen sweeping her porch across the way. Normal life, regular Thursday afternoon. Meanwhile, Ruby's entire world was caving in because some politicians decided women couldn't be trusted with their own property unless a man signed off on it. She pressed her palms against the work table, breathing hard. The wood was smooth under her hands, worn down by years of kneading dough in this exact spot. Her father's spot before it was hers. He taught her every recipe she knew, showed her how to read an oven by sound and smell, told her the bakery would always take care of her if she took care of it. He never mentioned she'd need a husband to keep it. The bell above the door chimed. Ruby didn't look up. "We're closed," she said flatly. "Sign says open till 5. The voice was female, sharp with amusement. "It's 3:30. Ruby raised her head. Margot Hayes stood in the doorway, one eyebrow arched, arms crossed over her embroidered vest. Margot ran the boarding house 2 streets over and had opinions about everything. She was also one of maybe 3 people in this town Ruby could stand for more than 10 minutes. "Did you hear?" Ruby asked. Everyone heard. Margot stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Letter came to my place too. Different section, same horseshit. Apparently boarding houses run by unmarried women are morally questionable establishments that might corrupt the youth. They can't do this." "They already did." Margot picked up the crumpled letter from the floor, smoothed it out against her thigh. Her expression went tight as she scanned the text. 60 days, same as mine." Ruby slumped against the table. "What are you going to do?" "Haven't decided yet. Burn down the territorial office, maybe. Start a riot. Marry some drunk and poison his coffee." Margot's voice was light, but her jaw was set hard. "You?" "I don't know." That was the truth. Ruby had spent the last hour cycling through rage, panic, and a bone-deep exhaustion that made her want to lie down on the floor and never get up. Marriage wasn't something she'd ever planned for. Most men in Coldwater were either spoken for, too old, or the kind of fool who thought women were decoration. The few single ones worth half a damn weren't interested in a sharp-tongued baker who smelled like yeast and had opinions. "There's always Miller," Margot said, clearly reading her thoughts. Ruby snorted. "John Miller proposed to every unmarried woman in town last year, even tried his luck with Widow Chen. So? He's got land, he's not hideous, and he's too stupid to interfere with your business. He's also got wandering hands and breath like a dead horse." Margot wrinkled her nose. "Fair point." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down like humidity before a storm. Outside, someone laughed, high and careless. Ruby felt a sharp spike of resentment toward whoever could laugh on a day like this. "There's got to be another way," she said quietly. "If there is, I haven't found it." Margot set the letter on the counter. "But if you figure something out, you let me know. I'm not letting these bastards take what I built either." After Margot left, Ruby locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. Screw the last 90 minutes of business. She couldn't smile at customers right now, couldn't make small talk about the weather while her life crumbled. She went to the back room and sat on her cot, staring at nothing. The light through the small window shifted from gold to amber to deep orange. Evening came on fast this time of year. Ruby should start prep for tomorrow's bread, get the dough rising overnight, check her supply of sugar and dried fruit. Instead, she sat there, mind racing in circles that went nowhere. Marry someone. The idea sat in her stomach like bad meat. She'd seen what marriage did. Her mother, worn down to nothing by the third baby, dead before the fourth could walk. Her friend Lizzie, bright and loud at 17, married at 18 to a miner who liked his whiskey more than his wife. Quiet and gray by 20. Even the good marriages, the ones where people seemed happy, still meant giving up something. Your name, your time, your right to make decisions without checking with someone else first. Ruby had built her whole life around not giving up anything. And now the law said that didn't matter. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to darkness and the sound of shouting outside. Ruby stumbled to the window, pressing her face against the glass. Down the street, orange light flickered. Fire. Her heart kicked into her throat. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside barefoot, the packed dirt cold under her feet. Half the street was already gathered near the smithy, O'Connor's place, the only blacksmith shop within 20 miles. Flames licked out of the forge area, reaching toward the wooden overhang. "Bucket line!" someone yelled. Ruby joined without thinking, falling into the rhythm of pass, grab, pass that everyone in a frontier town learned young. Water sloshed from hand to hand, bucket after bucket dumped onto the flames. The fire hissed and spat, angry at being challenged. It took maybe 20 minutes to kill it. Felt like hours. When the last of the embers were drowned, people started drifting away, muttering about luck and close calls. Ruby's arms ached. Her shawl was soaked through. She was turning to leave when she noticed someone still standing near the smithy, a tall figure silhouetted against the smoking building. She knew who it was before he stepped into the lamplight. Kyle. He'd been O'Connor's apprentice for maybe 2 years now, though apprentice seemed like the wrong word for someone who did most of the actual work while O'Connor drank himself stupid in the saloon. Cale was Apache, quiet to the point where people forgot he was in the room, and skilled enough that half the ranchers within 50 miles requested him specifically for their metalwork. Ruby had maybe spoken 3 words to him total. He was examining the damage now, face unreadable in the dim light. The overhang was partially collapsed, charred black at the edges. The forge itself looked intact, but everything else was a mess of ash and smoke damage. "Could have been worse," she offered. Cale's eyes flicked to her, dark eyes, sharp and assessing. He nodded once. "O'Connor inside?" she asked. "Saloon." His voice was low, rough from smoke. "Where he always is." Ruby grimaced. Everyone knew O'Connor had been going downhill since his wife died. The smithy stayed open purely because of Kyle. If the old man had any sense, he'd have signed the business over already. But O'Connor was stubborn and drunk. A bad combination. "You get burned?" Cale showed her his hands, reddened, blistered across the palms, but not terrible. "I'll live. Should put something on those." He just looked at her, expression unchanging. Ruby got the message. Mind your own business. She turned to go, then stopped. An idea was forming, half wild and completely stupid. She shoved it down. Walked 3 steps. The idea followed. No, absolutely not. 4 more steps. It's insane. She made it halfway down the street before she turned around and marched back. Kyle was still there, now sitting on an overturned crate, looking at his damaged shop with the kind of blank expression that probably hid a lot of feeling. He glanced up when she approached. "I need to ask you something," Ruby said, "and I need you to hear me out before you say no." His eyebrows rose a fraction. That might have been surprise, hard to tell. Ruby took a breath. "You know about the Property Act?" The new one? Everyone knows. Right. Well, I've got 60 days to get married or I lose the bakery. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that hurt. I'm guessing you've got your own problems. O'Connor's half dead from drink, this place almost burned down, and even if you keep it running, you can't own it. You're not white, and you're not married to his daughter or some shit. Kyle's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Attention, maybe. Interest. Here's what I'm thinking, Ruby continued, speaking fast before she could talk herself out of it. 6 months. We get married on paper, keep our businesses, tell everyone whatever story keeps them from asking questions. It's a deal, a contract. After 6 months, we go our separate ways, file for annulment, or whatever it takes. You get the smithy in your name, I keep the bakery. Nobody loses. Silence. Cale stared at her like she'd just proposed they burn down the church and dance in the ashes. You're serious, he said finally. Dead serious. You don't even know me. I know you're not a drunk. I know you work hard. I know you're not going to try anything stupid because you've got your own reasons for needing this. Ruby crossed her arms. Look, I'm not asking you to love me or even like me. I'm asking you to sign some papers and share a roof for 6 months so we can both keep what's ours. That's it. People will talk. People always talk. Let them. Cale stood up slowly, favoring his left leg. Old injury, she noticed. He was taller than she'd realized, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who worked with their hands. There was a scar along his jawline, faded white against his skin. Why me? He asked. Good question. Ruby didn't have a good answer. Because you need this too, she said, and because everyone else in this town is either married, useless, or would make my life hell. You're the only option that doesn't make me want to walk into the desert and never come back. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Might have been a smile. Impossible to say. I need to think about it, he said. You've got 3 days. After that, I'm asking someone else. You don't have anyone else, Ruby bristled. I could find someone. No, you couldn't. That's why you're here. He said it without malice, just stating facts. Then he picked up his crate and headed toward the burned smithy. I'll give you an answer in 3 days. She watched him disappear into the smoke-stained building, then turned and walked home through streets gone quiet. The stars were out, hard bright points against the black sky. Desert stars. Ruby had lived under them her whole life, and they'd never looked as foreign as they did tonight. Back in her room, she lit a lamp and sat at her small table, pulling out paper and a pencil. If she was really doing this, if Kyle actually said yes, she needed to think it through. Make a plan. Figure out how 2 complete strangers could convince an entire town they were married for real. The pencil hovered over blank paper. Where did you even start with something like this? 3 days crawled past like wounded animals. Ruby threw herself into work, baking more bread than she could sell, trying to exhaust herself into not thinking. It didn't work. Every time the shop door opened, she looked up expecting Kyle. Every time it was someone else. She served customers with half her mind elsewhere. Mrs. Patterson asked 3 times if the cinnamon rolls were fresh before Ruby actually heard the question. Young Tommy Ferguson wanted to know if she was feeling all right, which meant she looked as terrible as she felt. On the 3rd day, just before closing, the door opened. Kyle walked in. Ruby's heart did something complicated in her chest. She set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter, wiping her palms on her apron instead. So? She asked. He closed the door behind him, locked it, flipped the sign to closed, even though they still had 20 minutes. Then he turned and looked at her with those unreadable dark eyes. I have conditions, he said. Ruby let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Okay. We tell people we've been seeing each other quiet for a while. Keeps the gossip down. Fine. We live in my place. It's bigger. Ruby opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. The smithy had a full house attached, 3 rooms and a real kitchen. Her bakery had a cot and a wash basin. All right. Separate beds. Obviously. And when it's done, it's done. Clean break. No complications. That's the whole point. Ruby studied his face, looking for cracks in the neutral expression. Why'd you say yes? Kyle was quiet for a moment. Then, O'Connor's dying, liver's going, he's got maybe a year. He already told me when he goes, his nephew gets the smithy. City boy who doesn't know a hammer from a horseshoe. Place will be sold inside a month. Jesus. This way, when the marriage is registered, I can file ownership transfer papers. Say O'Connor sold it to me, make it legal before he dies. Cale's jaw tightened. I've put 3 years into this place. I'm not letting some Eastern asshole sell it for parts. Ruby nodded slowly. So they were both doing this for the same reason, keeping what they built. That was something, at least. Common ground. When do we start? She asked. Tomorrow. I'll talk to Pastor Williams, get the ceremony scheduled. You figure out what story we're telling people. We should be seen together first, make it believable. Kyle considered this. Sunday, church. I don't go to church. You do now. He headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the lock. This is going to be harder than you think. I know. No, you don't. He turned the lock, opened the door. But you will. Then he was gone, leaving Ruby alone with the dying afternoon light and the weight of what they'd just agreed to. She locked up properly this time, going through the motions automatically while her brain spun. This could work. It had to work. The alternative was losing everything. That night she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the whole plan falling apart in a dozen different ways. Someone finding out the truth. The marriage license being rejected. Cale changing his mind. The 60 days running out before they could make it legal. By the time gray dawn light crept through her window, Ruby was exhausted and wired at the same time. She got up, splashed water on her face, braided her hair with shaking hands. Sunday came faster than she wanted. Ruby owned one good dress, dark blue with black buttons, saved for funerals and the occasional town meeting. She put it on, hating how tight it felt around her ribs. Town clothes. Pretend to be proper clothes. The church was already half full when she arrived. Ruby slipped into a pew near the back, nodding at people she knew, ignoring the curious looks. She never came to services. Everyone would notice. Let them notice. That was the point. Pastor Williams was mid-sentence about mercy or grace or something when the door creaked open. Ruby didn't turn around, but she felt the shift in the room, that particular quality of attention that meant someone interesting had walked in. Kyle. He walked down the center aisle like he owned the place, settled into the pew beside her without a word. His shoulder brushed hers. Ruby kept her eyes forward, acutely aware of every whisper, every turned head. Subtle, she murmured. You wanted to be seen. Not quite like this. But it was too late now. The damage, or the foundation, depending on how you looked at it, was done. By tonight, everyone in Coldwater would know Kyle and Ruby had sat together in church. By tomorrow, the speculation would start. By next week, people would swear they'd seen signs of this for months. That was how small towns worked. After the service, they walked out together. Ruby could feel eyes tracking them, conversations pausing as they passed. Cale seemed unbothered, which made sense. He'd spent years being stared at. She, on the other hand, wanted to set something on fire. Now what? She asked once they were outside. Now we let them talk. Cale glanced at her. Wednesday, marriage clerk's office, 10 in the morning. That fast? You've got 57 days left. We can't wait. He was right. Ruby nodded, throat tight. They parted ways at the corner, Kyle heading toward the smithy, Ruby back to her bakery. The morning crowd would be wanting fresh bread. Life kept moving even when everything was changing. The next 3 days were a blur of flour and fire and sleepless nights. Ruby baked, served customers, accepted congratulations from people who'd somehow already heard she was getting married. How the news spread so fast, she had no idea. Magic, maybe. Or just the inevitable result of being noticed in a place where nothing interesting ever happened. Margot stopped by Tuesday evening, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed. So, she said. Kyle. Ruby kept kneading dough, not looking up. Yeah. That was fast. I don't have time for slow. Margot was quiet for a moment. He seems decent. Quiet, but decent. That's what I'm counting on. You know what people are saying, right? That it's weird, that you barely know each other, that he's Apache? Ruby's hand stilled on the dough. Yeah, I know what people say. Don't care. Margot studied her carefully. You sure about this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Wednesday morning arrived cold and gray. Ruby put on her blue dress again, pinned her hair up proper, and walked to the territorial office with her heart hammering against her ribs. Kael was already there, waiting outside. He'd cleaned up, fresh shirt, hair pulled back, boots brushed free of ash. He looked uncomfortable in a way that made Ruby feel slightly better about her own discomfort. Ready? He asked. No, you. No. They went inside together. The marriage clerk was a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He looked at them over his paperwork with the kind of professional disinterest that came from processing 100 marriages just like this one. Names, he said. They gave them. He wrote, slow and methodical. Purpose of marriage? Ruby blinked. What? Some people file for property transfer, business partnership, etc., just for the records. Personal, Kael said flatly. The clerk shrugged and made a note. Then came the vows, stripped down, legal things that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with binding contracts. Ruby repeated words that felt like ashes in her mouth. Kael did the same, his voice steady and completely empty of emotion. Rings? They exchanged a look. No rings, Ruby said. The clerk sighed like this happened all the time. Fine. Sign here, Ruby signed. Her hand shook slightly, making the letters wobbly. Kyle signed beside her, his handwriting surprisingly neat. Congratulations, the clerk said, sounding like he was congratulating them on filling out tax forms. You're married. Next. That was it. They walked out into weak autumn sunlight as husband and wife, bound by law and lies and desperation. Ruby felt dizzy. This was insane. They just legally tied themselves to each other based on a conversation in a burned smithy and mutual stubbornness. So, she said, now what? Kael looked at her, expression carefully neutral. Now we figure out how to live together without killing each other. Great, fantastic, this will be fun. His mouth twitched. You picked this. So did you. They stood there on the street, two strangers wearing the label of married, with no idea what happened next. Around them, Coldwater went about its business. Wagons creaking, children shouting, someone hammering something somewhere. Normal life. Regular Wednesday. Except Ruby's life had just tilted sideways into something she couldn't quite name. I'll move my things tonight, she said. I'll clear space. They parted ways again, this time with the weight of legal documents between them. Ruby walked back to her bakery in a daze, her mind already spinning through logistics. What to bring, what to leave, how to share space with someone she barely knew. The bakery felt different when she unlocked the door. Smaller, maybe. Or she was seeing it through the lens of leaving, which changed everything. She had 5 hours until closing, 5 hours to pretend this was a normal day. She put on her apron, started a batch of bread, served customers with a smile that felt painted on. Mrs. Patterson was the first to mention it. I heard congratulations are in order, she said, eyeing Ruby with undisguised curiosity. Word travels fast. It's a small town, dear. When did this start? You've been so quiet about it. Ruby had practiced this. Few months. Didn't want to say anything until we were sure. Well, he's an odd choice, but I suppose love finds a way. The comment stung more than it should have. Ruby kept smiling. I suppose it does. The day dragged on. More customers, more barely concealed nosiness disguised as well wishes. Ruby answered questions with vague pleasantries, volunteered nothing, and counted down the minutes until she could lock the door. When evening finally came, she packed her things into 2 crates, clothes, books, her mother's hairbrush, a few kitchen items she couldn't stand to leave behind. It wasn't much. Turned out you could fit a whole life into 2 wooden boxes if you really tried. She carried them down the street as the sun set, turning the sky orange and purple. The smithy looked different in evening light, less industrial, almost homey. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone had fixed the burned overhang. Ruby knocked. Kael opened the door. He looked at her crates, then at her face, and stepped aside without a word. The interior was cleaner than she expected. Organized. There was a sitting area with 2 chairs and a table, A kitchen that actually had counter space, 2 doors leading to what must be bedrooms. It smelled like wood smoke and metal, and something else she couldn't identify. "That one's yours," Kyle said, nodding toward the door on the left. "I moved my stuff to the other room." Ruby set her crates down. "You didn't have to. It's bigger. You'll need space for your things." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and carried her crates into what was now her room. It was sparse but functional. Bed, dresser, small window overlooking the side street. Kale had left a lamp burning on the dresser. When she came back out, he was in the kitchen, doing something with a pot on the stove. "You cook?" she asked. "Well enough not to starve." Ruby leaned against the doorframe, suddenly exhausted down to her bones. "This is weird." "Yeah. We should have rules, boundaries." Kale glanced at her. "Like what?" "I don't know, privacy, space. Don't go in each other's rooms without knocking. Don't—" She fumbled for something that sounded reasonable. "Don't expect me to cook for you or clean up after you. This isn't that kind of arrangement." "Agreed. Same goes for you. And we need to keep our stories straight. If people ask how we met, what we say, we met at the market, started talking, found we had things in common." Kale stirred whatever was in the pot. "Simple story. Hard to mess up." "What kind of things in common?" He was quiet for a beat. "Both lost our families young. Both know what it's like to build something from nothing. Both stubborn enough to try anyway." Ruby blinked. She hadn't expected anything that close to true. "That works," she said quietly. They ate dinner in careful silence, some kind of stew that was better than she'd anticipated. After, Ruby washed the dishes while Kael disappeared into his room. She heard him moving around, the low creak of floorboards, a window opening. This was her life now, sharing space with a stranger, pretending to be something they weren't, all to keep what was theirs. Ruby dried the last plate and set it aside, then stood at the kitchen window looking out at the darkening street. Somewhere out there, people were probably still talking about the odd marriage, the Apache blacksmith and the sharp-tongued baker. What a pair! Let them talk. She'd survive 6 months of gossip if it meant keeping her bakery. Behind her, Kael's door opened. Footsteps in the hall, then his voice. "Lights out in an hour. I've got early work." "Fine." The door closed again. Ruby stayed at the window until full dark, then went to her new room and lay down on a bed that wasn't hers in a house that wasn't home. The ceiling was unfamiliar. The sounds were wrong. Everything felt temporary and precarious, like standing on ice that might crack any second. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the next 6 months, failed completely. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Ruby counted each sound, cataloging this new life until exhaustion finally pulled her under. When she woke, weak dawn light was filtering through the curtains and she could smell coffee. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory crashed back. The marriage, the contract. Kael. Right. This was real. Ruby got dressed and found Kael in the kitchen, already working on something. He glanced at her, nodded toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself." She poured a cup, grateful for something to do with her hands. The coffee was strong and bitter. Perfect. "What time do you open the bakery?" he asked. 6. "I start at 5. I'll be gone before you leave." So they'd barely see each other. That should make things easier. Ruby finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and headed for the door. Kael's voice stopped her. "Ruby." She turned. He was standing by the stove, silhouetted against the window. His expression was hard to read in the dim light. "We'll make this work," he said. "Whatever it takes." Ruby nodded, throat tight. "Yeah, we will." Then she walked out into the cold morning, back to her bakery, back to flour and fire and the familiar rhythm of work that made sense. But everything was different now. She was married to a stranger, living a lie, and the clock was ticking. 54 days to go. The first week was a nightmare of small adjustments and careful avoidance. Ruby learned that Kael made coffee strong enough to strip paint, that he left for the smithy before dawn without eating breakfast, and that he had a habit of working late into the night when he couldn't sleep. She learned the sound of his footsteps, the way the floorboards creaked differently under his weight, the particular silence that meant he was in the next room but didn't want to be disturbed. He learned that Ruby talked to herself while baking, that she hoarded the kitchen counter space like a territorial cat, and that she had nightmares sometimes, woke up gasping in a way that carried through the thin walls. Neither of them mentioned it. They circled each other like wary animals, polite and careful and completely exhausting. By Thursday, Ruby wanted to scream. She came home late that evening, flour dusted in her hair, and exhaustion dragging at her bones. The bakery had been slammed all day. Apparently everyone in town suddenly needed bread now that she was married, or they wanted an excuse to stare and ask invasive questions disguised as friendly interest. Kael was at the kitchen table when she walked in, paper spread out in front of him, lamp burning low. He looked up briefly, nodded, went back to whatever he was reading. Ruby dropped her bag by the door harder than necessary. "Long day?" he asked without looking up. "You could say that." That was it. The entire conversation. Ruby filled a glass with water, drank it too fast, refilled it. The silence pressed against her skull. "Mrs. Patterson asked me today how long we'd been courting," she said. "I told her 3 months. You remember that, right? 3 months." "I remember." "And Tommy Ferguson wanted to know where we're going for our honeymoon. I said we weren't. He looked at me like I'd grown a second head." Kael finally glanced up. "What'd you tell him?" "That we're practical people with businesses to run," which is true. "Close enough." He went back to his papers. Ruby set her glass down with more force than needed. "You know what else people are saying? That it's strange we don't act like newlyweds, that we seem more like business partners than a married couple." "We are business partners." "They don't know that." Kael's jaw tightened. "What do you want me to do about it?" "I don't know. Act like you care I exist? I'm sitting here talking to you, aren't I?" "Barely." Ruby realized she was almost shouting and forced herself to lower her voice. "Look, I know this isn't real. I know we're just doing this to keep our businesses. But if people start asking too many questions, if they think something's wrong, then what? They'll annul the marriage? Check our papers?" Kael stood up, papers forgotten. "We filed legally. The marriage is valid. What people think doesn't change that. You don't understand how this town works. I've lived here 3 years. I understand exactly how it works." His voice was sharp now, that careful neutrality cracking. "I understand that no matter what we do, people will talk. I'm Apache, and you're white, and we got married fast. That's 3 things for them to chew on right there. Adding some fake romance on top isn't going to change their minds." Ruby opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. He wasn't wrong. The town had been talking since the moment they sat together in church. Nothing they did now would stop that. "Fine," she said. "You're right. Forget I said anything." She turned to leave, but Kael's voice stopped her. "We could try harder." Ruby looked back. "What?" "To look like a real couple, if it matters that much to you." He crossed his arms, looking uncomfortable. "What do married people do?" "I don't know. I've never been married before." "Neither have I." They stared at each other across the kitchen, 2 people who'd gambled everything on a lie and were now realizing they had no idea how to sell it. "They spend time together," Ruby said slowly. "Talk, eat meals, go places as a unit." "We eat meals." In silence, while avoiding eye contact. Kael's mouth twitched. "Fair point." "So maybe we—" Ruby fumbled for the right words. "Maybe we make an effort. In public. Act friendly. Like we actually chose each other." "We did choose each other. Just not for the reasons they think." "You know what I mean." Kael was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he nodded once. "All right, we try harder, starting tomorrow." "Tomorrow's Friday, market day." "Then we go to the market, together, buy supplies. Let people see us." Ruby's stomach twisted at the thought, but she nodded. "Okay, market day, together." That night she lay awake listening to Kael move around in the next room, wondering what she'd just agreed to. Acting like a couple in public meant touching, smiling, pretending there was something between them besides a legal contract and mutual desperation. She could do this. She'd survived worse. Friday morning came too fast. Ruby dressed carefully, picking a blouse that didn't have flour stains and pinning her hair back properly. When she came into the kitchen, Kyle was already there, looking similarly cleaned up. He'd shaved. That was new. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." They walked to the market side by side, not quite touching, but close enough that it probably looked intentional. Ruby's skin prickled with awareness of him, the way he moved, the careful distance he maintained, the tension in his shoulders that matched her own. The market square was crowded, vendors calling out their wares, children weaving between the stalls. Ruby spotted Margot near the vegetable stand and waved. Margot raised an eyebrow, clearly taking in the sight of Ruby and Kyle together. "Morning," Margot said when they approached. "Don't you two look cozy?" "We're shopping," Ruby said. "I can see that." Margot's eyes danced with amusement. "Together. Very domestic." Kyle picked up a potato, examined it with more focus than any potato deserved. Ruby resisted the urge to kick him. "We need vegetables," she said. "Clearly." Margot handed her a bunch of carrots. "These are good. Mrs. Chen grew them." They made it through 3 more stalls before Ruby felt Kyle's hand on her lower back. Brief, light, gone almost before she registered it. She glanced at him. He was looking at something past her shoulder, expression neutral, but there was a tightness around his eyes. Ruby followed his gaze and saw what he'd seen. A group of men near the hardware stall, watching them. One of them said something and the others laughed. "Ignore them," she muttered. "I am." But his hand found her back again, staying this time. A statement. A claim. Ruby's first instinct was to pull away, but she forced herself to stay still. This was what they'd agreed to, looking like a real couple. She just hadn't expected it to feel so strange. They finished shopping in silence, carrying their purchases back through streets that felt too crowded, too watched. Ruby's skin buzzed where Kyle had touched her, which was ridiculous. It was just a hand, just a performance. Back at the house, Kyle unpacked vegetables while Ruby sorted through the other supplies. The silence felt different now, charged somehow, awkward in a new way. "That wasn't so bad," Ruby offered. "No. We should probably do it more often, be seen together." "Probably." Ruby set down a bag of flour more forcefully than needed. "Are you going to answer in full sentences or just keep grunting at me?" Kyle looked up, surprised. "I'm not grunting. You're barely talking. I'm talking right now. Single words don't count as conversation." "What do you want me to say?" There was frustration in his voice now, breaking through the careful control. "That I enjoyed parading around the market while people stared and whispered? That I liked putting my hand on you while those men made jokes about whether I know what to do with a white woman?" Ruby flinched. "They said that?" "They didn't need to. I could see it in their faces." Kyle shoved a carrot into a basket with unnecessary force. "But sure, let's do it again. Let's give them more to talk about." "We don't have a choice." "I know that. Doesn't mean I have to like it." Ruby opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "I don't like it either. But it's part of the deal, part of making this believable." "Fine. Then we'll keep doing it." Kale grabbed the basket and headed for the cold storage. "But don't expect me to enjoy it." He disappeared into the back room. Ruby heard the sharp sound of the basket being set down, harder than necessary, then silence. She stood in the empty kitchen, feeling the weight of the next 5 months pressing down on her shoulders. This was going to be harder than she'd thought. Harder than either of them had thought. But there was no going back now. The weekend passed in a blur of work and careful avoidance. Ruby spent most of Saturday at the bakery, staying late to avoid going home. When she finally did return, Kyle was already locked in his room, lamplight showing under the door. Sunday they went to church again. Sat together, stood for hymns, pretended to listen to Pastor Williams drone on about patience and faith. Ruby caught Mrs. Patterson watching them, lips pursed in evaluation. She reached over and took Kyle's hand. He went rigid. Ruby squeezed once, a silent message. "We're being watched." After a moment, Kyle relaxed slightly, squeezed back. His hand was rough with calluses, warm and solid. He held on through the rest of the service, thumb occasionally brushing over her knuckles in a way that might have looked affectionate. It was just acting. Ruby told herself that firmly, just playing a part. But her hand tingled for an hour after they let go. Monday brought new problems. A man showed up at the bakery mid-morning, tall, thin, with spectacles and an officious manner that set Ruby's teeth on edge immediately. "Mrs. Calder?" he asked. "That's me." "James Fletcher, Territorial Land Office." He pulled out a leather notebook. "I'm here to verify your recent marriage filing." Ruby's stomach dropped. "Verify?" "Standard procedure for marriages involving property transfer or business ownership. Just need to ask a few questions." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Won't take long." Ruby wiped her hands on her apron, trying to look calm. "What kind of questions?" "When did you and Mr. Kyle begin your courtship?" 3 months ago. We met at the market." Fletcher made a note. "And you're currently residing together at the Smithy property?" "Yes." "Can you describe your husband's daily routine?" Ruby blinked. "What?" "His routine. What time he wakes, when he works, his habits. Simple things a wife would know about her husband." Her mind raced. "He wakes early, before dawn, works at the smithy most days until evening, comes home for dinner, works on paperwork at night." "Does he have any hobbies, friends he visits?" "He keeps to himself mostly, reads sometimes." Fletcher's pen scratched across paper. "And how would you describe your relationship? Affectionate? Distant?" "We're private people," Ruby said carefully. "We don't make a show of things." "Some might say you barely knew each other before marrying. Some people should mind their own business." Fletcher looked up, eyebrow raised. "No need to be defensive, Mrs. Calder. I'm simply doing my job. The Territorial Office takes marriage fraud very seriously, particularly when property is involved." "There's no fraud. We're legally married." "Yes, you are. The question is whether it's a genuine marriage or a business arrangement designed to circumvent property laws." He closed his notebook with a sharp snap. "I'll be back next week to speak with your husband. I suggest you both get your stories straight." He left before Ruby could respond. She stood frozen behind the counter, pulse hammering in her ears. Marriage fraud. Investigation. This was exactly what they'd been afraid of. She closed the bakery early and ran to the smithy. Kyle was working when she burst in, hammering something on the anvil. He looked up at the sound of the door, took one look at her face, and set down his tools. "What happened?" "Land Inspector. Fletcher. He came to the bakery asking questions." The words tumbled out fast. "About us, our routine, how long we've known each other. He said he's investigating potential marriage fraud." Cale's expression went carefully blank. "What did you tell him?" "The story we agreed on. 3 months, met at the market. But he didn't believe me. I could tell." "What exactly did he ask?" Ruby recounted the conversation as best she could remember. Cale listened without interrupting, face unreadable. "He's coming back to talk to you," she finished. "Next week. We need to make sure we're telling the same story." "We are telling the same story. But do we know it well enough?" "He asked about your daily routine, your hobbies, things a real wife would know." Ruby paced across the smithy floor. "We've been so focused on the big details we forgot about the small ones." Cale wiped his hands on a rag, thinking. "Then we learn them. The small details." "How?" "We talk, ask questions, actually get to know each other instead of pretending the other person doesn't exist." He crossed his arms. "You wanted to try harder. Here's your chance." Ruby stopped pacing. "You're right. I know. Don't be smug." "I'm not being smug. I'm being practical." Cale glanced at the half-finished piece on his anvil. "I need to finish this, but after dinner we can talk, share information, whatever we need to pass inspection." "Okay, after dinner." Ruby left feeling marginally better and significantly more anxious. They had maybe a week to learn enough about each other to convince a trained investigator they were a real couple. No pressure. That evening, she made dinner. Actual dinner, not just bread and cheese. Stew with the vegetables from market. Bread from her morning batch. Cale came in looking surprised. "You cooked." "We need to eat. Might as well do it properly." They sat across from each other at the small table, bowls steaming between them. Ruby picked up her spoon, set it down, picked it up again. "This is weird," she said. "Yeah. We should just start asking questions." "All right." Cale took a bite of stew. "What's your full name?" "Ruby Ann Calder. Yours?" KL. Just KL. No last name? My people don't use them the same way. When I came here, I just used Kyle. Easier. Ruby nodded, filing that away. Where are you from? Originally? South, near the border. My mother's people moved seasonally. We were camped near a mining settlement when soldiers came through. His voice was flat, factual. Most of us scattered. I ended up in a mission school for a while, then on my own. How old were you? 8. Ruby's chest tightened. 8 years old and alone. She wanted to say something, but there were no words that wouldn't sound empty. Your turn, Kyle said. Tell me about your family. Not much to tell. Mother died when I was 12. Father raised me and my brother until the fever took them both. I was 17, kept the bakery running because I didn't know what else to do. Brother? Tommy. He was 15, sweet kid. Terrible at baking but good with numbers. Ruby pushed stew around her bowl. The fever took him first, then my father 3 days later. I sat with both of them until they died because there was nobody else. Kyle was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry. Yeah, me too. They ate in silence for a while, each lost in old grief. Ruby found she didn't mind the quiet as much this time. It felt different, less like avoidance, more like shared understanding. What else does Fletcher need to know? Kyle asked eventually. Probably things like, I don't know, what we argue about, what we like about each other, normal couple things. We argue about counter space. Ruby almost smiled. That's true. And you talk to yourself while baking. Full conversations. It's distracting. You work until midnight making noise. That's distracting. See, we know things about each other already. Kale's mouth quirked. We're terrible at living together. Very realistic. This time Ruby did smile. What else? He might ask about physical affection. Whether we... She stopped, feeling her face heat. Whether we share a bed, Kyle finished. We tell him no, separate rooms. Some married couples do that. It's not illegal. Right, but he might ask why. We say it's private. None of his business. Will that work? It'll have to. Kyle stood collecting their empty bowls. What else do you think he'll ask? They spent the next hour going through possibilities, building a shared story that was part truth, part careful construction. By the time they finished, Ruby's head hurt and she'd filled 3 pages with notes. This is exhausting, she said, rubbing her temples. Better exhausted than exposed. I know, She trailed off, not sure how to finish that thought. Kale leaned against the counter, studying her. You regret this? The marriage? No. Maybe. I don't know. Ruby set down her pencil. I regret that it's necessary. That we live in a world where I can bake better bread than half the men in this town, but I can't own property without a husband. That you can build half the equipment this town relies on, but can't own the shop you work in because of your blood. I regret all of that. But not the marriage itself? Ruby considered. Not yet. Ask me again in 5 months. Something shifted in Kyle's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Fair enough. The next few days fell into a new pattern. They ate breakfast together, comparing schedules, walked to town side by side when timing allowed, actually talked instead of maintaining careful silence. Ruby learned that Kyle had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he read technical manuals for fun, and that he had strong opinions about metallurgy that could fill an entire evening if you let him. He learned that Ruby had memorized every recipe her father taught her, that she hated mornings but loved the smell of bread baking, and that she had a temper that could ignite over small injustices but went cold and calculating over big ones. They weren't friends. Not exactly, but they were becoming something other than strangers. Thursday evening, Ruby came home to find Kyle in the kitchen with something burning on the stove. What are you doing? She asked. Cooking, trying to. He poked at whatever was in the pan with a wooden spoon. It's supposed to be eggs. That's not eggs, I don't even know what that is. It started as eggs. Ruby moved him aside, assessed the damage, and scraped the pan into the waste bucket. You're terrible at this. I know. How have you survived this long? Bread from your bakery, stew, things that don't require skill. He watched her crack fresh eggs into the pan. I can make coffee. Your coffee could strip rust off metal. You drink it anyway. Because I need to wake up, not because it's good. Ruby added salt, pepper, moved the eggs gently with the spoon. Here, like this. Low heat. Don't let it stick. Kyle watched over her shoulder. He was standing close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from him. It should have been uncomfortable. Instead, it just felt normal, like they'd done this 100 times. Why are you trying to cook anyway? Ruby asked. Thought I should learn, in case you're not here. I'm always here. You work late sometimes, and it seems unfair that you do all the cooking when we both need to eat. Ruby glanced back at him, surprised. That's actually thoughtful. Don't sound so shocked. I'm not shocked, I'm just... She turned back to the eggs before they could burn. Most men don't think about fair division of labor. I'm not most men. No, you're really not. They ate the eggs together, Kyle studying her technique like he was memorizing blueprints. Afterward, he actually helped clean up without being asked. Ruby dried dishes while he washed, their rhythm surprisingly smooth. Fletcher's coming tomorrow, Kale said. To the smithy. Are you ready? As I'll ever be. He handed her a wet plate. We should match our stories one more time. They went through everything again. How they met, why they married, daily routines, small details. By now it was almost automatic. Ruby could recite their fictional courtship in her sleep. What if he asks something we haven't prepared for? She said. Then we tell him the truth, just not all of it. That's a terrible strategy. You have a better one? Ruby didn't. She dried the last dish in silence, mind spinning through worst-case scenarios. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to sounds from the next room, Kyle moving around, restless like her. Around midnight, she heard his door open, footsteps in the hall, then the front door. Ruby got up and looked out her window. Kyle was sitting on the porch step, looking at the stars. His shoulders were tight with tension. Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed a shawl and went outside. Can't sleep either, she asked. Kyle glanced at her. No. Ruby sat down beside him, pulling the shawl tight against the night chill. The street was empty, houses dark. Just the two of them and the vast desert sky. What if he figures it out? She said quietly. What if we slip up? Then we figure something else out. There is nothing else. This was the plan. The only plan. Then we don't slip up. Kale's voice was steady, certain. We've come this far. We'll make it work. Ruby wanted to believe that, needed to believe it. You're very calm for someone whose entire future depends on lying convincingly to a government inspector tomorrow. I'm not calm. I'm just good at pretending. Yeah. Ruby pulled her knees to her chest. Me too. They sat in silence, not quite touching, but close enough to feel connected. Above them, stars wheeled across the black sky, indifferent to human problems. Why did you really say yes? Ruby asked. To this arrangement. Kyle was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I'm tired of building things for other people. Tired of making something work and watching someone else profit. Tired of being invisible unless someone needs my skills. He picked at a splinter on the porch step. This was a chance to own something, actually own it. I'd have married anyone for that. Even me? You're not as bad as you could be. Ruby laughed despite herself. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in weeks. You're difficult, stubborn, you have a temper. You're not exactly easy either. I know. Kale glanced at her sideways. But we're making it work, somehow. Yeah, somehow. Friday arrived with all the weight of Judgment Day. Ruby opened the bakery but couldn't focus, burning a batch of rolls and nearly cutting herself twice. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. Around 11, she saw Fletcher walking toward the smithy. She couldn't leave the bakery. Customers needed her, and abandoning shop in the middle of the day would look suspicious. But every minute crawled past like an hour. She measured flour wrong, forgot orders, gave Mrs. Patterson the wrong change twice. Are you all right, dear? Mrs. Patterson asked, peering at her with concern. Fine, just tired. Marriage not agreeing with you? Ruby forced a smile. Marriage is fine. Just busy. She managed to get through the rest of the afternoon on autopilot, her mind across the street wondering what Fletcher was asking, what Kyle was saying, whether their carefully constructed story was holding together or falling apart. At 5 o'clock, she locked up and practically ran to the smithy. Cale was alone, sitting at his desk, staring at nothing. Well? Ruby demanded. He looked up. He's gone. And? He asked the same questions you said he asked you. Daily routine, how we met, why we got married so fast. I told him what we agreed on. Did he believe you? I don't know. Kyle rubbed his face. He took notes. Said he'd file his report. That's all. Ruby's legs felt weak. She sat down hard on the nearest stool. So we just wait? We wait. For how long? However long it takes. The not knowing was worse than anything. Ruby went home that night feeling like she was balanced on a knife edge, waiting to fall. She picked at dinner, barely tasting it. Cale wasn't much better. We did everything right, she said. Our stories matched. We looked legitimate. I know. So why do I feel like we're about to get caught? Because we are lying, and lies have a way of coming apart. Ruby set down her fork. That's not helpful. You asked. They cleaned up in tense silence. Ruby was drying the last plate when Kyle spoke again. If this falls apart, if Fletcher decides we're committing fraud, what happens? They annul the marriage, seize the property. We lose everything. Both of us? Both of us. Cale nodded slowly, processing that. Then we'd better make sure our story holds. Over the next week, they became meticulous about their performance. Walked to town together every morning, ate lunch at the small restaurant on Main Street where everyone could see them, attended a town meeting side by side, Cale's hand resting on Ruby's back in that casual way that looked natural if you didn't know better. People stopped asking questions. The whispers faded to background noise. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed satisfied that they were a proper married couple. Ruby started to relax slightly. Maybe they'd pulled it off. Maybe Fletcher would file his report and move on to the next case. Then one evening, 2 weeks after Fletcher's visit, Ruby came home to find Cale standing in the kitchen with a letter in his hand. His face was ashen. What? She asked. He held out the letter wordlessly. Ruby took it, hands shaking. Official territorial seal at the top. Her eyes skipped over the formal language, catching on key phrases. Further investigation required. Inconsistencies noted. Scheduled inspection of living arrangements. When? She whispered. Next Friday. They're sending someone to verify we actually live together as husband and wife. Ruby sank into a chair. They're going to look at our rooms, see we have separate beds. I know. We're screwed. Not necessarily. Kyle sat down across from her. Lots of married couples sleep separately. It's not proof of fraud. Combined with everything else, the fast marriage, the property involved, the way people talk about us. Ruby's voice rose. They're looking for a reason to shut this down. Separate bedrooms might be all they need. Then we don't give them separate bedrooms. Ruby's head snapped up. What? One room? One bed? We make it look like a normal married couple lives here. Cale's jaw was set. It's just for the inspection. One night. We can manage that. Share a bed? Unless you have a better idea. She didn't. Ruby's mind raced through alternatives and came up empty. This was happening. They were going to have to share a bed to keep their lie alive. Which room? She asked. Yours is bigger. Okay. So we move your things in. Make it look lived in by both of us. And move everything that looks like you have your own separate room into storage. They spent the evening rearranging the house. Ruby's dresses moved into Kyle's closet. His shaving kit appeared on her dresser. They combined their books on a single shelf, hung both their coats by the door. Slowly, methodically, they erased the evidence that two strangers lived here and created the illusion of a shared life. By midnight, the house looked different, lived in, real. Ruby stood in the doorway of what was now their bedroom, looking at the bed that suddenly seemed very small. This is fine, she said. It's just sleeping. People sleep next to each other all the time. Right. We're adults. Professionals. We are. So this is fine. Kale looked at her. You said that already. I know. Ruby pressed her hands to her face. I'm panicking. I noticed. Aren't you panicking? Internally, yes. Despite everything, Ruby laughed. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was laughter. Kale's mouth quirked. We'll figure it out, he said. We always do. The week leading up to the inspection was a study in sustained anxiety. Ruby rehearsed casualness, practiced looking comfortable in her own home, and generally drove herself half crazy with preparation. Kale threw himself into work, hammering metal with enough force to shake the walls. Thursday night, the night before the inspection, neither of them could eat. They sat at the table pushing food around their plates until Ruby finally gave up. This is pointless. I'm not hungry. Neither am I. They cleaned up mechanically, moving around each other in a rhythm that had become familiar over the past weeks. Ruby washed while Kyle dried, his shoulder occasionally brushing hers in the small kitchen. When the dishes were done, they stood looking at each other, the weight of what came next hanging between them. I'm going to bed, Ruby said. I'll be there in a few minutes. She changed in the washroom, pulling on her nightgown with shaking hands. This was stupid. It was just sleeping. They'd been living in the same house for weeks. This shouldn't feel different, but it did. Ruby climbed into bed and lay rigid on the far edge, staring at the ceiling. She heard Kyle moving around, the sound of him changing clothes, washing up. Then the lamp went out and the mattress dipped as he got in on the other side. They lay in darkness, carefully not touching, both pretending to sleep. This is ridiculous, Ruby said finally. Yeah. We're acting like children. I know. It's just sleeping. You keep saying that. Ruby rolled onto her side, facing away from him. Go to sleep, Kyle. You first. Somehow, eventually, exhaustion won. Ruby drifted off with the sound of Kyle's breathing behind her, steady and calm. When she woke in the gray pre-dawn light, she was confused by the warmth at her back. Then she realized. Sometime in the night, they'd migrated toward each other. Kale's arm was draped over her waist, her back pressed against his chest. They were tangled together like they'd been sleeping this way for years. Ruby froze. She should move. Wake him up, retreat to her side of the bed. Instead, she lay there, acutely aware of every point of contact, the rise and fall of his breathing, the weight of his arm. It felt nice, safe, which was absurd because this whole arrangement was about survival, not comfort. Behind her, Kyle's breathing changed. He was awake. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, carefully, Kyle's arm withdrew. He rolled away, putting space between them. Morning, he said, voice rough with sleep. Morning. They got up separately, moved through their morning routine with elaborate casualness, and didn't mention it. What was there to say? It had been an accident. Unconscious. Didn't mean anything. Ruby told herself that all through breakfast, through getting ready, through the long wait for the inspector to arrive. At 10 o'clock exactly, there was a knock at the door. Ruby opened it to find not Fletcher, but a severe-looking woman with graying hair and a clipboard. Mrs. Calder, I'm Inspector Morrison. Here for the residence verification. Of course, come in. Morrison stepped inside, eyes already scanning. She looked at everything, the coats by the door, the combined bookshelf, the kitchen with its mix of their belongings, made notes without comment. I'll need to see the bedroom, she said. Ruby's heart hammered. This way. She led Morrison to the bedroom, Kyle following behind. Morrison walked in, looked at the bed, the dresser with both their items, the closet. You share this room? She asked. Yes, Ruby said. One bed? Yes. Morrison made a note. Some couples maintain separate sleeping arrangements. We're not some couples, Kyle said evenly. Morrison's eyes sharpened. How long have you been married, Mr. Kyle? 5 weeks. And you're comfortable sharing quarters? We're married, Ruby said. That's generally what married people do. Indeed. Morrison wrote something else. I'll need to ask you both some questions, separately. Ruby's stomach dropped. They'd prepared for this, but actually doing it was different. Morrison interviewed Ruby first, asking about morning routines, sleeping habits, how they divided household tasks. Ruby answered carefully, sticking to truths where possible, embellishing only when necessary. Then it was Kyle turn. Ruby waited in the kitchen, counting seconds, trying not to imagine what he was saying. When Morrison finally emerged, her expression was unreadable. "Thank you for your cooperation," she said. "I'll file my report by end of week." "And?" Ruby couldn't help asking. Morrison looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "You'll receive notice of the decision within 10 business days." Then she was gone, leaving Ruby and Kyle standing in their rearranged house, waiting again. 10 days had never felt so long. The letter came on day 9. Ruby was elbow deep in dough when someone knocked. She wiped her hands and opened the door to find a territorial courier, official seal on his satchel, face bored with routine. "Ruby Calder?" he asked. Her mouth went dry. "Yes." "Sign here." She signed with shaking hands. The courier handed her a thick envelope and left without ceremony. Ruby stood holding it like it might explode, flour dust settling on the brown paper. The bakery suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. She locked the door, flipped the sign, and walked to the smithy on legs that didn't feel entirely solid. Kyle was at the forge, his back to her, hammer ringing against metal in steady rhythm. He must have heard her come in but didn't turn around, just kept working like the letter wasn't about to decide their entire future. "It came," Ruby said. The hammer stopped mid-swing. Kyle set it down carefully, turned around. His face was unreadable, but his hands were tight on the work gloves as he pulled them off. "You didn't open it." "Not without you." They stood looking at each other across the smithy floor, neither moving. The envelope felt heavy in Ruby's hands, weighted with consequence. "Do it," Kyle said finally. "Whatever it says, we deal with it." Ruby's fingers fumbled with the seal. The paper tore unevenly, and she pulled out 2 sheets covered in official letterhead and dense text. Her eyes skipped over the formal language, searching for the verdict. After thorough investigation and inspection of the residents and parties involved, this office has determined that the marriage between Ruby Ann Calder and KL, filed on the 15th of October, shows evidence of fraudulent intent. The marriage is hereby subject to annulment proceedings. All property claims associated with said marriage are suspended pending final determination. You have 14 days to appeal this decision before it becomes final. The words blurred. Ruby read them again, slower, hoping they'd change. They didn't. "No," she whispered. "What does it say?" She couldn't make her voice work, just handed him the letter and watched his face as he read. Saw the muscle in his jaw clench, the way his eyes went flat and hard. "Fraudulent intent," he said. "They're calling us liars." "We are liars." "That's not the point." Cale crumpled the letter in his fist. "They have no proof. Morrison saw us living together. We answered every question. How did they—" "Someone talked." Ruby's brain was starting to work again, moving past the shock to cold analysis. "Someone told them something that made them suspicious." "Who?" "Does it matter? They know? Or they think they know. Either way, we're—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say the word that meant losing everything. Cale threw the crumpled letter across the room. It bounced off a tool chest and landed in the dirt. The violence of it was so unexpected that Ruby flinched. 3 years, he said, voice low and dangerous. 3 years I've been working this shop, building it up, making it profitable, and now some bureaucrat in an office decides my marriage isn't real enough so I lose it all? We have 14 days to appeal. Appeal with what? What evidence do we have that the marriage is genuine? We sleep in the same bed because we had to for the inspection. We barely knew each other 2 months ago. There's nothing real here, and they know it. The words hit like a slap. Ruby felt something crack in her chest. Right, she said. Nothing real, just business. That's not what I meant. No, you're absolutely right. This was a deal, a transaction, and now the deal's gone bad, so we cut our losses. Ruby turned toward the door. I'll pack my things tonight. Ruby, wait. For what? You just said there's nothing here. No reason to appeal, so we're done. She didn't look back. Thanks for trying, I guess. She walked out before he could respond, before the burning in her eyes could turn into actual tears. That would be pathetic. Crying over a fake marriage that was ending exactly like it was supposed to, just 3 months early. The walk back to the bakery felt like moving through water. Everything was too bright, too loud. Ruby unlocked the door and stood in the empty shop surrounded by the smell of flour and yeast, and for the first time since her father died, she had no idea what to do next. She'd lose the bakery. That was certain now. The Property Act didn't care that she'd built this place with her own hands, that she knew every quirk of the oven, that the recipes were written in her father's handwriting in a book she kept in the back. Unmarried women couldn't own businesses. That was the law. Ruby pulled out the recipe book and ran her fingers over the stained pages. Her father's writing, neat and precise, with little notes in the margins about temperature adjustments and timing. Add extra yeast if the weather is cold. Let the dough rest 20 minutes, not 15. Ruby likes more cinnamon in the morning rolls. She'd been 12 when he wrote that last part, young enough to believe the bakery would always be there, solid and permanent as the building itself. The bell above the door chimed. Ruby looked up, expecting a customer, and found Margot instead, face tight with concern. I heard, Margot said. News traveled fast. Of course it did. Heard what exactly? That they're annulling your marriage, calling it fraud. Margot came around the counter without asking. Ruby, what happened? We got caught. How? You were careful. Everyone saw you together. Not careful enough, apparently. Ruby closed the recipe book. Someone must have said something, or maybe Morrison just had a feeling. Doesn't matter now. Margot was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. Leave town maybe. Start over somewhere else. And Kyle? Ruby's chest tightened. What about him? You're just walking away? Not even going to try to appeal? There's nothing to appeal with. The marriage was fake. They figured it out. End of story. Ruby heard the brittleness in her own voice and hated it. I'm not going to drag this out just to lose anyway. That doesn't sound like you. Maybe you don't know me as well as you think. Margot studied her with 2 sharp eyes. Or maybe you're scared. Of what? That somewhere along the way this stopped being fake, and you don't want to admit it. Ruby laughed, harsh and ugly. That's ridiculous. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone who just had their heart broken. My heart's fine. It's my bakery I'm losing. Right, the bakery. That's all. Margot headed for the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think you should fight. Both of you. But that's your choice. After she left, Ruby stood in the empty bakery and tried to feel nothing. Failed completely. That night she couldn't bring herself to go back to the smithy. Instead, she slept on the cot in the bakery's back room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the building settle. Around midnight, she heard footsteps outside. The door handle rattled. Ruby? Cale's voice muffled through the wood. I know you're in there. She didn't answer. We need to talk about the appeal. There's nothing to talk about. Yes, there is. Let me in. Go away, Cale. Silence. Then, I'm sorry. For what I said earlier, I was angry and I took it out on you, and that was wrong. Ruby pulled the blanket over her head. She didn't want to hear this. You asked me once why I really agreed to this arrangement, Kyle continued. I said it was about owning something. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. His voice was quieter now, like he was sitting against the door. The real reason is that I was tired of being invisible, of building things and having nobody see me. You saw me. You walked into my smithy and offered me a deal, like I was someone worth dealing with, like I mattered. Ruby's throat closed up. These past 2 months, living with you, learning your routine, watching you fight for what's yours. He paused. It stopped being just business pretty fast, at least for me, and I think maybe for you too. But I got scared and said something stupid, and now you're sleeping in your bakery instead of coming home. It's not home, Ruby said, voice muffled by the blanket. It was never home. It was just a place we were both staying. You're right. It wasn't home, not at first. Another pause. But somewhere around week 3 when you taught me how to make eggs, or week 5 when I fixed your oven and you smiled like I'd given you gold, it started feeling like one. At least to me. Ruby sat up slowly, blanket falling away. She walked to the door and pressed her palm against the wood, imagining she could feel him on the other side. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying maybe we should fight for this. Not because we have to, because we want to. They'll laugh us out of the appeals office." "Probably, but at least we'll go down swinging." Ruby leaned her forehead against the door. Every logical part of her brain said this was stupid, that they should cut their losses and move on. But logic hadn't been running things for a while now. "I don't know how to fight this," she admitted. "Neither do I, but we figure it out, like we always do." She unlocked the door. Kyle was sitting on the step exactly like she'd pictured, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He looked up when the door opened, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Okay," Ruby said. "We fight. But if we're doing this, we do it honestly. No more lies, no more pretending." "What does that mean?" "It means we go to the appeals hearing and tell them the truth, all of it. That the marriage started as a business arrangement but became something real. That we're not perfect, and we don't have all the answers, but we're trying." She held out her hand. "And then we let them decide." Kyle took her hand and stood. "That's a terrible plan. Admitting fraud right before asking them not to punish us for it? You have a better idea?" "No." "Then it's the plan we've got." They walked back to the smithy together through empty streets, not talking, just moving in matched rhythm. When they got inside, Ruby realized she'd been thinking of it as home for weeks now. The way she knew which floorboards creaked where Kyle kept his coffee, the exact angle of afternoon light through the kitchen window, all of it familiar in a way that snuck up on you. "I'll sleep in the other room tonight," Kyle said. "Give you space." "Don't." He stopped. "What?" "We've been sleeping in the same bed for almost 2 weeks. Seems stupid to stop now." Ruby tried for casual and missed by a mile. "Besides, if we're telling the truth at the hearing, we might as well start practicing being honest about this too." Something shifted in Kyle's expression. "Ruby, I'm not saying anything dramatic. I'm just saying we don't have to pretend anymore. Not here. Not with each other." She headed for the bedroom before courage could fail her. "You coming or not?" She changed in the washroom, hands shaking slightly. This was different from the inspection, different from all the careful performance they'd been maintaining. This was choosing to share space because they wanted to, not because they had to. When she came out, Kyle was already in bed, lamp burning low on the nightstand. He watched her cross the room with an expression she couldn't quite read. Ruby climbed in beside him. They lay facing each other in the dim light, close enough to touch but not touching. "This is terrifying," she said. "Yeah. What if the appeal doesn't work? Then we lose everything and start over. Together?" Kale reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand settled on her hip, warm and solid. "If you want." "I think I do. Want that, I mean." Ruby's heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest. "Which is insane because 2 months ago I couldn't stand the idea of marriage, and now I'm married to someone you actually like? Like is a weak word for whatever this is. What would you call it?" Ruby didn't have an answer for that. Or she did, but saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea what was at the bottom. So instead she moved closer, closing the gap between them until they were breathing the same air. "Ask me again after the hearing," she whispered. Kale's thumb traced small circles on her hip through her nightgown. "All right." They fell asleep tangled together, no longer pretending it was accidental. The next 12 days were a blur of preparation and mounting dread. Ruby and Kyle spent every evening going over what they'd say at the hearing, how to frame the truth in a way that wouldn't immediately get them thrown out. It was impossible. Every version sounded either too defensive or too cavalier. "Maybe we should just grovel," Ruby said on day 4. "Throw ourselves on the mercy of the court. Courts don't have mercy. They have rules. Then we're screwed." They kept preparing anyway because what else could they do? And somewhere in the middle of the preparation, something else was happening. The careful distance they'd maintained for weeks was dissolving. Kale started kissing her goodnight, casual, almost absent-minded, like they'd been doing it for years. Ruby found herself reaching for his hand while they walked, not for show, but because it felt right. They cooked together, argued about small things, made each other laugh. It would have been perfect if not for the sword hanging over their heads. On day 8, Fletcher showed up at the bakery. Ruby looked up from kneading dough and felt ice slide down her spine. "What do you want?" "Just checking in." He leaned against the counter with false casualness. "Wanted to see how you're holding up." "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like someone who's about to lose everything." His smile was thin and sharp. "Though I suppose that's accurate." "Get out of my shop." "It's not your shop. Not anymore. Not unless you can prove that marriage is real, which we both know you can't." Fletcher straightened. "Here's some free advice. Drop the appeal. Save yourself the embarrassment. The decision's already made." "Then why are you here?" "Because I don't like loose ends. And you and your Apache Smith are a very loose end." He headed for the door, paused. 14 days go by fast. I'd start packing if I were you." After he left, Ruby's hands were shaking so hard she couldn't work. She locked up early and went to find Kyle. He was in the smithy office, surrounded by papers. Property deeds, marriage certificates, business records, everything they might need for the appeal spread across every surface. "Fletcher came to the bakery," Ruby said. Cale's head snapped up. "What did he want?" "To gloat. To tell us we're going to lose." She slumped into a chair and, "He knows something. I could see it in his face. He's so sure we won't win." "Maybe he's bluffing." "Maybe. Or maybe he already knows what the appeals board is going to say, and he's just enjoying watching us scramble." Cale pushed the papers away. "You want to give up?" "No." "Yes. I don't know." Ruby rubbed her face. "I'm tired, Kyle. Tired of fighting. Tired of being afraid. Part of me just wants it to be over." "And the other part?" She looked at him across the cluttered desk. "The other part wants to walk into that hearing and tell them exactly what happened. That we started this as a lie, but it became real. That I don't know when or how, but somewhere along the way I stopped pretending and started—" She caught herself, swallowed hard. "Started caring about you. More than I should. More than is smart." Kyle stood up and came around the desk, pulled Ruby to her feet and kissed her, not casual this time, but deep and desperate and absolutely certain. "Say it," he said against her mouth. "I love you." The words came out broken. "I'm in love with you, and we're going to lose everything, and I don't know what to do about either of those things. We fight, we tell them the truth, and whatever happens, we do it together." Ruby kissed him again, pouring 2 months of fear and frustration and unexpected feeling into it. When they finally pulled apart, she was breathing hard. "Together," she agreed. Day 14 arrived cold and gray, the kind of morning that felt like an omen. Ruby put on her blue dress, the same one she'd worn to the original marriage filing. Kyle wore his good shirt, the one he saved for occasions that required looking respectable. They walked to the territorial office in silence, hands clasped tight. Ruby's stomach was in knots. Every step felt too heavy, like moving through mud. The hearing room was smaller than she'd expected. Just a plain chamber with a long table where 3 board members sat, papers stacked in front of them. Fletcher was there too, sitting off to one side with a satisfied smirk that made Ruby want to hit him. "Mrs. Calder, Mr. Kyle." The woman in the center, she had iron gray hair and a face like judgment itself, gestured to 2 chairs. "Please sit." They sat. Ruby's hands were clammy. Beside her, Kyle was perfectly still, only the muscle in his jaw betraying tension. "We've reviewed your appeal," the woman continued. "Before we proceed, I want to be clear about what's at stake. If we uphold the fraud determination, your marriage will be annulled and all property claims voided. You'll each have 30 days to vacate your respective businesses. Do you understand?" "Yes," Ruby said. "Mr. Fletcher's investigation provided substantial evidence that your marriage was contracted solely for property retention purposes. Evidence includes testimony from multiple witnesses, inconsistencies in your stated timeline, and the suspicious timing relative to the Property Act deadline." She looked at them over her spectacles. "Do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Ruby and Cale exchanged a glance. This was it, the moment they'd been dreading and preparing for. "Yes," Kyle said. "We do." "Proceed." He stood up slowly. Ruby's heart hammered. "The investigation is correct," Kyle said. "We did marry for property retention. Ruby needed a husband to keep her bakery. I needed legal standing to claim the smithy. We drew up a contract, set a 6-month term, and filed the paperwork. Fletcher's smirk widened. The board members exchanged looks. However, Kyle continued, that's not the whole story. Oh? The gray-haired woman's eyebrow arched. Enlighten us. We were strangers when we married. Barely knew each other. It was supposed to be a business arrangement, nothing more. And for the first few weeks, that's exactly what it was. His voice was steady, factual. But living with someone, sharing space, learning their routines, you can't do that and stay strangers. We started talking, learning about each other, finding common ground. Common ground in a fraudulent marriage, Fletcher interjected. Let him finish, the woman snapped. Cale nodded thanks. By week 3, something had shifted. We weren't just tolerating each other anymore. He paused, searching for words. We were building something. I don't know what to call it. But it was real. Ruby stood up beside him. Her legs felt shaky, but she locked her knees. He's right, she said. We got married for all the wrong reasons. I won't lie about that. But what happened after? That wasn't part of the plan. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't plan to care about whether he ate breakfast. I didn't plan to miss him when he worked late. I didn't plan to fall in love with someone I barely knew. The room went very quiet. Love, the gray-haired woman repeated flatly. How convenient to discover that during an appeal hearing. It's not convenient, it's terrifying. Ruby's hands were shaking. Do you know how hard it is to admit that you gambled everything on a lie and then had it turn into something real? That you started out trying to cheat the system and ended up caring about someone more than the property you were trying to save? Affecting speech, Fletcher said, but it doesn't change the facts. You committed fraud. We did, Cale agreed, at the beginning, but marriage isn't just paperwork. It's what happens after you sign. It's learning to live with someone, trust them, build a life together. He reached for Ruby's hand. We've done that. Maybe not the traditional way. Maybe not for the traditional reasons. But we've done it. The gray-haired woman leaned back in her chair. So your defense is that you started with fraud, but claim it became genuine? Yes. Based on what evidence? Your word. Based on the fact that we're standing here willing to lose everything rather than lie about it anymore, Ruby said. We could have kept pretending. Could have come in here and sworn up and down that we were childhood sweethearts, or whatever story would work. Instead, we're telling you the truth, even though it might destroy us. Doesn't that count for something? One of the other board members, a thin man with wire spectacles, spoke for the first time. It counts for honesty, which is admirable, but it doesn't negate the original fraud. Then what would? Cale asked. What evidence would prove our marriage is real now? None, Fletcher said, because it isn't real. It's a business arrangement that developed emotional complications. That doesn't make it legitimate. Ruby felt something break loose in her chest. Anger, sharp and clean. You want to know what's not legitimate? She said, voice rising. Laws that say I can bake better bread than anyone in this town, but can't own the shop because I don't have a husband. Laws that say Kyle can build half the equipment this county relies on, but can't own property because of his blood. Those laws, those are fraudulent. We just found a way to survive them. Mrs. Calder, no. You want honesty? Here's honesty. The system is rigged. It's designed to keep people like us down. So yes, we gamed it. We found a loophole and we used it. And somewhere along the way, we actually found something real in all the lies. Ruby was shaking now, fury and fear mixed together. So go ahead, annul the marriage, take the bakery, take the smithy. Punish us for trying to survive in a world you rigged against us. But don't sit there and pretend this is about legitimacy. It's about control. Silence crashed down. Fletcher looked furious. The board members were stone-faced. The gray-haired woman stood up. We'll deliberate. Wait outside. Ruby and Kyle were escorted to a bench in the hallway. The door closed with finality. They sat side by side, not talking, Ruby's outburst still hanging in the air. Well, Kyle said finally, that was honest. I probably just made everything worse. Maybe. Or maybe you said what needed saying. They're going to annul us. Probably. Ruby laughed, slightly hysterical. We're going to lose everything. Yeah. Any regrets? Kyle turned to look at her. About the marriage? No. About not telling you I loved you sooner? A few. Ruby's breath caught. You love you, yes. Probably have for a while. Just took me longer to realize it than you. He touched her face gently. So whatever happens in there, at least we had this. Had each other. Even if it was brief. Ruby kissed him right there in the hallway, not caring who saw. When they pulled apart, she was crying. If they annul us, she said, what happens? We start over. Together if you want. Separately if you don't. I want together. Then that's what we do. The door opened. The gray-haired woman stood in the doorway, face unreadable. We've reached a decision, she said. They stood on shaking legs and walked back into the hearing room. This was it. The end of everything they'd built. The woman sat down, shuffled papers. The silence stretched. This board has reviewed all evidence and testimony, she began. The facts are clear. You entered into marriage with fraudulent intent. You admit as much. Ruby's fingernails dug into her palms. However, the woman's eyes were sharp. The purpose of marriage law is not to enforce romantic feeling. It's to create stable household units and legal partnerships. Whether those partnerships begin from love or practicality is, legally speaking, irrelevant. Hope flickered. Ruby didn't dare breathe. What matters is whether the marriage is functional and maintained in good faith going forward. On that question, the evidence is less clear. You've cohabited, integrated your lives, by your own testimony developed genuine attachment. She paused. And you've demonstrated unusual honesty in admitting your initial fraud, which suggests you're operating in good faith now. Fletcher started to object. The woman silenced him with a look. Furthermore, Mrs. Calder's point about discriminatory property law is not without merit. This board cannot change territorial law, but we can acknowledge that it creates perverse incentives. She looked directly at Ruby and Kyle. The fraud determination is overturned. Your marriage stands. Property claims are reinstated. Ruby's knees went weak. Beside her, Kyle exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. However, the woman continued, you're both on notice. Any further evidence of fraud will result in immediate annulment with no appeal option. Do you understand? Yes, Ruby managed. Then this hearing is concluded. They stumbled out into bright afternoon sunlight, both half convinced they'd misheard. But the paperwork in Kyle's hands was real. The decision was real. They'd won. We won, Ruby said out loud, testing the words. We won, Kyle repeated, sounding dazed. Then they were laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other on the courthouse steps while people stared. Ruby didn't care. Let them stare, let them talk. She had her bakery, Kyle had his smithy, and they had each other. What do we do now? She asked when she could breathe again. Kyle kissed her forehead. We go home. We build our lives. We do it right this time. No more lies? No more lies. They walked home through town, past the bakery and the smithy and all the familiar streets that looked different now. Brighter somehow, like the world had rearranged itself into something new. That night they lay in bed, their bed now, not just a performance, and Ruby felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the absence of fear that had been her constant companion for months. I love you, she said into the darkness. I love you too. Even though I'm difficult and stubborn? Especially because of that, Ruby smiled against his shoulder. They'd started as strangers bound by desperation and lies. They'd nearly lost everything, but somehow, against all odds, they'd found something real. And that was worth fighting for. The euphoria lasted exactly 3 days. Ruby woke on the 4th morning to find Kyle already gone, the space beside her cold. She found him in the smithy before dawn, hammering something with enough force to wake half the street. You're up early? She said from the doorway. He didn't stop working. Couldn't sleep. Want to talk about it? Nothing to talk about. Ruby crossed her arms, watching him work. The rhythm was off, too aggressive, too uncontrolled. He was angry about something and taking it out on metal. Kyle. I said there's nothing to talk about. He finally stopped, set the hammer down hard. We won. Everything's fine. Go back to the bakery. Don't do that. Don't shut me out. I'm not shutting you out. I'm working. You're avoiding. Ruby came closer, ducking under a hanging tool rack. What's wrong? Kyle turned away, bracing his hands on the workbench. His shoulders were rigid. Fletcher came by last night, after you went to sleep. Ruby's stomach dropped. What did he want? To congratulate me. To tell me how lucky I was that the board bought our little performance. Cale's voice was bitter. He said we might have fooled them this time, but he'd be watching, waiting for us to slip up. One mistake, and he'd make sure we lost everything. He's just bitter we won. Is he wrong, though? Cale turned around. We did lie. We did commit fraud. The only reason we're still standing is because we convinced 3 people that our feelings matter more than the law we broke. Our feelings do matter. To us, maybe. But out there, he gestured toward the street. Half the town thinks we gamed the system. The other half thinks we're a mistake waiting to happen. And Fletcher's right. One wrong move and it all comes down. Ruby felt cold. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe we should be more careful. Keep our heads down, not draw attention. We're married. We live together. How much more normal can we get? I don't know. The frustration broke through. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be married for real when it started as a lie. Every time someone looks at us, I wonder if they know, if they're judging, if they're waiting for proof that this is all fake. It's not fake, isn't it? We got married to save our businesses. The love came after. That's backwards. Wrong. Ruby's chest tightened. Are you saying you regret this? No. Yes. I don't know. Cale ran his hands through his hair. I love you. That's real. But everything else, the marriage, the circumstances, the scrutiny, sometimes it feels like we're still lying even when we're telling the truth. So what do you want to do? I don't know. They stood in the smithy as dawn light crept through the windows, neither knowing what to say. Finally, Ruby turned to leave. Where are you going? Kyle asked. To work, like you said. She paused at the door. When you figure out what you actually want, let me know. The bakery felt like a refuge. Ruby threw herself into work, kneading dough until her arms ached, scrubbing counters that were already clean, anything to not think about the conversation in the smithy. But customers had questions. How's married life? Mrs. Patterson asked, buying her usual Thursday rolls. Fine, Ruby said. Just fine? You're still newlyweds, should be more than fine. Ruby forced a smile. It's wonderful. I'm just tired. Well, make sure you take care of that husband of yours. Men need attention or they wander. Ruby bit back several sharp responses and handed over the rolls. After Mrs. Patterson left, she slumped against the counter. Margot came by around noon, took one look at Ruby's face, and locked the door. What happened? Nothing. Everything. I don't know. Ruby rubbed her eyes. Kyle's having doubts. About you? About all of it. The marriage, the circumstances. Fletcher's been in his head telling him we're frauds. You won the appeal. Doesn't matter. We still started with a lie and now Kyle's wondering if that taints everything else. Ruby's voice cracked. What if he's right? What if no matter how real our feelings are, the foundation is too rotten? Margot was quiet for a moment. Then, you want my honest opinion? Not really, but go ahead. You're both scared. You gambled everything, you won, and now you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, so you're sabotaging it before external forces can. Margot leaned against the counter. It's self-protection, and it's stupid. That's harsh. You asked for honest. Margot's expression softened. Look, I don't know if your marriage will last. Nobody knows that about any marriage. But giving up now because you're afraid of losing later, that's just losing with extra steps. Ruby knew she was right. Didn't make it easier. That evening, she came home. She still thought of it as home despite everything. To find Kyle in the kitchen making dinner, badly, but making it. Hey, he said without turning around. Hey, I'm making stew, or trying to. It might be terrible. Probably will be. He glanced back, mouth quirking slightly. Thanks for the confidence. Ruby set down her bag. We need to talk. I know. Cale turned off the stove, facing her properly. I was an ass this morning. Yeah, you were. I'm sorry. I let Fletcher get in my head, started doubting everything. He crossed his arms, then uncrossed them, clearly uncomfortable. I'm not good at this. At being vulnerable. At trusting that good things can last. You think I am? I watched my entire family die. I built that bakery expecting to lose it someday. Trust doesn't come easy for me either. So what do we do? Ruby considered. We make a choice. Either we believe this is real and we fight for it, or we decide it's too complicated and we walk away. But we can't keep doing this halfway thing where we're together but waiting to fall apart. I don't want to walk away. Neither do I. But I don't know how to stop being afraid. Me neither. Ruby moved closer. Maybe we're afraid together. Maybe that's allowed. Kael pulled her into his arms. Ruby pressed her face against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then someone pounded on the door. They broke apart. Kael went to answer it and found Tommy Ferguson on the doorstep, out of breath. There's a fire, Tommy gasped, at O'Connor's old place, spreading fast. Kael was already moving, grabbing his coat. Ruby followed without thinking. They ran through streets filling with smoke, joining the crowd gathering near what used to be O'Connor's house, now a rental property occupied by a family of 5. The building was engulfed. Flames ate through the wooden structure, reaching for the neighboring homes. People were already forming bucket lines, shouting instructions, moving with the practiced chaos of a town that knew fire. The family? Kael asked Tommy. Got out. All of them. But it's spreading toward the Chen's place. Ruby grabbed a bucket. So did Kael. They fell into the line, passing water, dumping it on flames that seemed to laugh at their efforts. Her arms screamed. Smoke burned her lungs. But she kept going because stopping meant letting the fire win. It took 2 hours to kill it. By the time the last embers were drowned, Ruby was covered in ash and sweat, hands blistered from the bucket handles. Kael looked worse. A burn across his forearm, face black with soot. The Chen's house was saved. So were 2 others. But O'Connor's place was gone, just a skeleton of charred beams and smoking rubble. The family who'd lived there sat on the street, wrapped in borrowed blankets, staring at the ruins of everything they owned. Ruby watched the mother hold her children, and something twisted in her chest. We have space, she said quietly. Kael looked at her. What? At our place. We have the 2nd bedroom. They need somewhere to stay. Ruby wiped soot from her face. We can help. Ruby, I know it's not much, and I know it's complicated, but they have nothing, and we have something, and... She stopped, realizing everyone was looking at her. The family, the neighbors, half the town gathered to fight the fire. The mother spoke, voice rough with smoke. We couldn't impose. You're not imposing, I'm offering. Ruby glanced at Kael. We both are. If that's okay. Kael studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. It's okay. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. That's how Ruby and Kael ended up with 3 children and 2 adults living in their house. The first night was chaos. The kids, ages 4, 7, and 9, were traumatized and exhausted. The parents, Maria and James, moved through the motions like people in shock. Ruby made beds and found spare clothes while Kael secured the smithy and made sure nothing dangerous was accessible to curious children. By midnight, everyone was finally settled. Ruby collapsed into bed beside Kael, too tired to even change out of her ash-covered clothes. This is insane, she muttered. Yeah. We barely know how to live together ourselves. Now we have 5 house guests. Yeah. You're not mad? Kael rolled to face her. Why would I be mad? Because I volunteered our space without really asking you first. Because this is going to be complicated and messy, and because you saw people who needed help and didn't hesitate. He touched her face gently. That's not something to be mad about. Ruby felt tears burn behind her eyes. I don't know what I'm doing. Neither do I. We'll figure it out. The next morning brought new challenges. The kids needed breakfast. Maria needed help finding their insurance papers in the rubble. James needed work to keep his hands busy and his mind from breaking. Ruby coordinated from the bakery while Kael handled logistics at the smithy. By day 3, they'd fallen into a chaotic routine. Ruby taught the oldest child, Anne, how to knead dough. Cale let the 7-year-old Michael help organize tools in the smithy. The youngest, Clara, mostly clung to her mother but occasionally wandered into the kitchen to watch Ruby work. "You're good with them," Maria said one afternoon, watching Ruby show Anne how to shape rolls. "I'm not really. I'm just, I don't know, trying. That's all any of us can do." Maria was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for this, for everything. You'd do the same." "I don't know. Not everyone would open their home to strangers." Maria's eyes were sharp. "Especially strangers who might judge them." Ruby's hand stilled on the dough. "You know, about us. I know you got married fast. I know people talk. I don't know if any of it's true, and I don't care." Maria started kneading her own dough. "What I know is you saw us at our worst and helped anyway. That says more than gossip ever could." That evening, Ruby found Kyle in the smithy working late. She sat on his workbench, watching him shape metal. "Maria knows," she said. "About the marriage?" "About the rumors. She doesn't care." Kyle set down his hammer. "Does that bother you?" "No, it's just, I thought we'd spend the rest of our lives proving ourselves to this town, but maybe some people don't need proof. Maybe some people just see what's actually there." "What's actually there?" Ruby smiled. "Two people trying to do the right thing, sometimes succeeding, often failing, but trying. That's generous." "It's true." Cale came to stand between her knees, hands settling on her hips. "These past few days, watching you help this family, seeing you handle everything, I keep thinking I don't deserve you. That's stupid. I was ready to give up. A week ago, I was so scared of losing this that I almost threw it away myself, and you just keep moving forward." "I'm scared too," Ruby admitted, "every day. But I'm more scared of not trying than I am of failing." "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just too stubborn to quit." He kissed her then, slow and thorough, like they had all the time in the world. When they finally pulled apart, Ruby was breathing hard. "We should get back," she said, "before the kids burn down the house." "They're probably fine." Michael was asking about the forge earlier. I don't trust that curiosity. They walked back together to find controlled chaos. Anne was helping Maria make dinner. James was fixing a loose cabinet hinge. Claire was drawing pictures at the kitchen table. Michael was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your brother?" Kyle asked Anne. "Outside, I think." They found him in the small yard behind the house, digging in the dirt with a stick. "What are you doing?" Ruby asked. "Making a garden. Dad said we used to have one, before the fire." Michael didn't look up. "I'm starting a new one." Ruby's throat closed up. She glanced at Kyle, saw her own emotion reflected in his face. "That's a good idea," Cale said quietly. "You want help?" Michael nodded. Cale grabbed a spare shovel from the smithy and joined the boy in the dirt. Ruby watched them work as evening settled in, the big man and the small child building something new from ash and loss. That night, after everyone went to bed, Ruby lay awake staring at the ceiling. "You okay?" Cale asked. "Just thinking." "About?" "About how a month ago we were strangers pretending to be married. Now we're actually married and housing a family of 5 and planting gardens." She rolled to face him. "How did we get here?" "One choice at a time." "Do you regret any of them?" "The choices?" Kyle considered. "I regret being afraid. I regret letting Fletcher make me doubt us. But the actual choices, marrying you, fighting for this, opening our home," he shook his head. "No regrets there. Even though it's complicated?" "Especially because it's complicated. Easy things don't mean as much." Ruby kissed him. "I love you. I love you too." The weeks that followed were an exercise in controlled chaos. Maria found work doing laundry for the boarding house. James got hired as an assistant at the general store. The kids slowly came back to life, trauma fading into something manageable. But the town was watching. Ruby felt it every time she went to market, every conversation that stopped when she approached. People were friendly enough on the surface, but underneath ran currents of judgment and curiosity. It came to a head 3 weeks after the fire. Ruby was at the bakery when Mrs. Patterson came in with 3 other women from the church committee. Their faces had that particular expression Ruby had learned to dread: pursed lips, false concern, righteous superiority. "Ruby, dear," Mrs. Patterson began, "we need to talk." Ruby set down her rolling pin. "About?" "About your living situation. It's come to our attention that you're housing the Martinez family." "That's right. They lost their home in the fire." "Yes, well, some people are concerned about the propriety of it all." Mrs. Patterson's smile was thin. "A newly married couple taking in strangers, 5 people in a small house. It raises questions." "What kind of questions?" "About the nature of your marriage, about whether this is appropriate." One of the other women, a sharp-faced blonde Ruby didn't know well, spoke up. "Some think you're using charity work to distract from irregularities in your own situation." Ruby felt heat rise in her chest. "Irregularities?" "You know what people say. Fast marriage, business motivations, the appeal hearing." The blonde leaned in conspiratorially. "We're just concerned that you're making your situation worse by drawing more attention." "Let me get this straight." Ruby's voice was dangerously calm. "A family lost everything in a fire. We had space, we helped, and you're turning that into evidence that my marriage is fake? Well, when you put it like that, how else should I put it? You're standing in my bakery suggesting that showing basic human decency is somehow suspicious." Ruby crossed her arms. "Is that what Christian charity looks like now? Judging people for helping?" Mrs. Patterson's face flushed. "There's no need to be rude." "There's every need. You came here to tell me I'm doing something wrong. I'm telling you to mind your own business. We're simply trying to help you understand how this looks. I don't care how it looks. I care about what it is. And what it is a family that needed help getting help from people who could provide it." Ruby's hands were shaking. "Now, if you're not buying anything, I'd appreciate it if you left." They left in a flutter of offended clucking. Ruby stood alone in her bakery, adrenaline making her hands shake. That evening, she told Kyle what happened. "They actually said helping the Martinezes makes us look suspicious?" he asked, incredulous. "Apparently charity is only acceptable when it's done by the right people in the right way." "That's—" He stopped, visibly working to control his temper. "We should tell them to leave. The Martinezes. Find them somewhere else to stay so people stop talking." "No." "Ruby, I said no. We're not kicking out a family because some church ladies have opinions. That's exactly what they want. Proof that we care more about appearances than doing the right thing." "This could hurt us. If they keep pushing, if they complain to the territorial office, let them. We won our appeal. Our marriage is legal, and we're not letting fear control our choices." Ruby grabbed his hand. "We do the right thing. Whatever comes, we handle it together. Isn't that what we decided?" Cale looked at their joined hands, then at her face. "You're more stubborn than I am." "I know. It's infuriating. I know that too." He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "All right, we keep helping. Let them talk." But the talk got worse. Over the next week, Ruby noticed people crossing the street to avoid her. The bakery had fewer customers. Even people who'd been friendly before turned cold. Margot was the only one who called it out. "They're punishing you," she said, standing in the empty bakery one afternoon, "for not falling in line." "I noticed." "It's working too. Your business is suffering." Ruby looked around the quiet shop. "Yeah. You could apologize. Tell the church ladies you understand their concern. Smooth it over." "Is that what you do?" Margot laughed bitterly. "Hell no. I'd burn their houses down. But I'm not exactly a role model for social success." "Then I guess we're both outcasts. Better company anyway." That night, Ruby sat at the kitchen table going over her accounts. The numbers didn't lie. Business was down 30%. At this rate, she'd struggle to make rent in 3 months. Maria came in carrying Clara, the little girl already asleep on her shoulder. "You're up late," Maria said quietly. "Can't sleep. You?" Clara had a nightmare. Maria settled the child more comfortably. "About the fire. They're getting less frequent, but they still come." Ruby closed her ledger. "I'm sorry." "Not your fault, though I hear people are blaming you for other things these days." "You heard about that?" "Small town. Word travels." Maria sat down across from Ruby. James and I have been talking. We've saved almost enough for first and last month's rent somewhere. We'll be out of your hair soon. You're not in our hair. Ruby, Maria's voice was gentle. We know what this is costing you. The whispers, the lost business. We're grateful for everything you've done, but we can't let you keep sacrificing for us. It's not a sacrifice. It is, and it's more than anyone should have to give. Maria touched Clara's hair absently. We'll be gone by end of month. Give you a chance to repair things with the town. After Maria went to bed, Ruby sat alone in the dark kitchen. She'd known this was coming. The Martinezes couldn't stay forever, but the timing felt like defeat, like the town had won, forcing out the evidence of Ruby's defiance. She found Kyle still awake, sitting on the porch step like that first night they talked under the stars. Can't sleep? She asked, sitting beside him. Too much noise in my head. He glanced at her. You? Same. Ruby told him about her conversation with Maria. They're leaving. Maybe that's good. Give things time to settle. Or maybe it's exactly what the church ladies want. Proof that we learned our lesson. Kyle was quiet for a long moment. Does it matter what they want? I don't know. I thought I didn't care about fitting in, but watching my business dry up, seeing people I've known for years cross the street to avoid me, it's harder than I expected. We could leave, both of us, start over somewhere else. Ruby had thought about it. Late at night, when the numbers looked bad and the future looked worse, she'd imagined packing up and disappearing, going somewhere nobody knew their history. No, she said finally. We fought too hard to keep this place. I'm not abandoning it because some people are small-minded. Then what do? We keep going. We show them we're not going anywhere. We outlast the whispers. Ruby leaned against his shoulder. And we trust that eventually people will see us for what we actually are. What are we? Two people who love each other and refuse to apologize for it. Kyle kissed the top of her head. I can live with that. The Martinezes moved out 2 weeks later into a small rental house on the edge of town. The kids cried. Maria hugged Ruby so tight it hurt. James shook Kyle's hand and said words about debt and gratitude that made both men uncomfortable. When they were gone, the house felt too quiet. Weird, Ruby said, standing in the empty second bedroom. Yeah, I kind of miss the chaos. Me too. They stood in the doorway looking at the vacant room that had briefly held a whole family's hopes and fears and slow healing. We did a good thing, Ruby said. Yeah, we did. That Sunday, Ruby and Kyle went to church. They sat in their usual pew, endured the stares and whispers, and held hands through the service. When it was over, Mrs. Patterson approached with her committee in tow. Ruby, Kyle, a word? Ruby braced herself. What now? Mrs. Patterson's expression was strange, uncomfortable, almost sheepish. We owe you an apology. Ruby blinked. What? The church committee has been discussing your situation, how we handled it, how we treated you for helping the Martinezes. Mrs. Patterson looked pained. We were wrong. To question your motives, to make you feel unwelcome for doing exactly what we claim to value. The blonde from before stepped forward. I spoke to Maria Martinez. She told me what you did for them, how you opened your home without hesitation, helped them rebuild. We were unkind in our judgment. Ruby didn't know what to say. Beside her, Kyle was equally stunned. We can't undo the damage, Mrs. Patterson continued. But we wanted you to know that we see now what you were trying to do, and we're ashamed of how we responded. Thank you, Ruby managed, and we'd like to make amends, if you'll let us. Mrs. Patterson actually smiled, genuine this time. The committee is organizing a community fundraiser for the Martinezes to help them fully replace what they lost. We'd be honored if you'd help coordinate it. Ruby looked at Kyle. He squeezed her hand. We'd be happy to help, she said. Over the next month, something shifted in Coldwater. The fundraiser brought people together, bake sales and auctions and community dinners. Ruby's bakery slowly filled again with customers who looked her in the eye and smiled. People stopped crossing the street. It wasn't perfect, some still whispered, some still judged, But enough people had changed their minds that the tide turned. And through it all, Ruby and Kyle built their life. Real mornings with real coffee and real arguments about who forgot to buy sugar. Real evenings working side by side, her kneading dough while he sketched designs. Real nights tangled together, no longer pretending anything. 6 months after their wedding, the original endpoint of their contract, they lay in bed watching moonlight paint shadows on the ceiling. "We made it," Ruby said. "Past the deadline?" "Yeah. This is when we were supposed to file for annulment." Cale rolled to face her. "You want to? File for annulment? Are you insane?" "Just checking." His mouth quirked. "Wanted to make sure you weren't having regrets." "My only regret is that I didn't fall in love with you faster. Could have saved us some trouble." "Where's the fun in that?" Ruby kissed him, slow and deep. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we keep going, keep building, keep fighting when we have to, and loving when we can." Kyle touched her face. "We do this for real. No contract, no end date. Just us." "Just us," Ruby agreed. And somewhere in the darkness, in a frontier town that had tried to break them and failed, two people who'd started as strangers bound by lies became something neither had expected. Partners in every sense. Flawed and stubborn and absolutely certain of each other. The town would keep talking. Laws would keep being unfair. Life would keep being complicated. But they'd face it together. And that was enough. The first real test came 8 months after the wedding, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. Ruby was at the bakery when Fletcher walked in. She hadn't seen him since the appeal hearing, had almost convinced herself he'd moved on to harassing someone else. Apparently not. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Just a friendly visit." He picked up a roll, examined it like he was looking for defects. "How's married life treating you?" "Fine." "Good, good. I heard you took in that family after the fire. Very charitable." He set the roll down without buying it. "Almost suspiciously charitable. Like you were trying to prove something." Ruby's jaw tightened. "Is there a point to this visit?" "Just checking in, making sure everything's still legitimate." His smile was thin. "The territorial office likes to do follow-up inspections. Random checks. You understand. We passed your inspection already. That was 8 months ago. Things change. People get comfortable. Slip up." Fletcher headed for the door, then paused. "I'll be seeing you soon, Mrs. Calder. You and your husband both." After he left, Ruby stood frozen behind the counter. Her hands were shaking. She locked up early and went to find Kyle. He was in the smithy office, going over accounts, looked up when she burst in. "Fletcher came by the bakery," she said without preamble. Kyle's expression went carefully blank. "What did he want?" "To threaten us. Said the territorial office does random follow-up inspections. That he'd be seeing us soon." "He's bluffing." "Is he?" Ruby paced across the small office. "He sounded pretty certain. And if they do another inspection, if they dig deeper, they won't find anything. We're actually married, actually living together, actually in love." Kale stood, cross to her. "There's nothing to find." "But what if someone talks? What if they interview the wrong person who remembers us being strangers 9 months ago? What if—" "Ruby," he caught her hands, stilling them. "We can't live in fear of what-ifs. We did that already. It nearly destroyed us." She knew he was right, but knowing didn't stop the panic crawling up her throat. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay staring at the darkness while Kyle breathed steady beside her and tried to quiet the voice in her head that said they'd never really escape what they'd done. That the lie would always be there, a crack in the foundation waiting to bring everything down. Around 2 in the morning, she gave up and went to the kitchen. Found Margot sitting at her table. Ruby yelped. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" "Kyle let me in. Said you'd probably be up." Margot pushed a cup of tea across the table. "Sit down before you have a panic attack." Ruby sat. "How did you know I was—" "Because I know you." Fletcher came by the boarding house too. Same speech, same threats, same smile that makes you want to punch him. Margot sipped her own tea. "He's making rounds, trying to scare everyone who bent the property laws." "Is it working?" "On you? Clearly. On me? I'm too mean to scare." Margot's expression softened slightly. But yeah, it's working. He wants us afraid, wants us to make mistakes. So what do? We don't make mistakes. We keep our stories straight. We live our lives like we've got nothing to hide. Margot leaned forward. And we remember that the law's on our side now. We won our appeals. We're legitimate. Fletcher can threaten all he wants, but he can't actually do anything unless we hand him evidence. What if he manufactures evidence? Then we fight again, like we did before. Margot stood. You're not alone in this, Ruby. Half the women in this town are in similar situations. We all bent the rules to survive. If Fletcher comes for one of us, he comes for all of us. After Margot left, Ruby felt marginally better. Not calm, but at least not drowning. She went back to bed and found Kyle awake. Feel better? He asked. You knew she was here. She knocked. I let her in. Figured you needed someone who understood. He pulled her close. I'm here too, you know. You don't have to carry this alone. I know, I keep thinking about how close we came to losing everything. How close we still are. We're not close to anything except building a real life together. Fletcher's a bully with a clipboard, that's all. Cale's voice was firm. We're not letting him take this from us. Ruby wanted to believe that. Tried to believe it. The inspection came 2 weeks later. A different official this time, young, nervous, clearly uncomfortable with his assignment. He looked at the house, asked basic questions, took notes with shaking hands. Everything appears in order, he said finally. I'll file my report. That's it? Ruby asked. That's it, unless... He hesitated. Unless there's anything you want to disclose, any irregularities. It was a trap, a clumsy one, but still a trap. Ruby felt Cale tense beside her. No irregularities, she said firmly. We're married. We live here. That's all there is to disclose. The official nodded, relieved. Good. That's good. I'll let the office know. After he left, Ruby and Kyle stood in their house, their actual home now, not just a performance space, and waited for the other shoe to drop. It didn't. A week passed, then 2. The inspection report must have been filed and forgotten, one more piece of bureaucratic paperwork in an endless stream. Fletcher didn't come back. Life slowly settled into something that resembled normal. Ruby's bakery thrived. Kyle's smithy stayed busy. They argued about money and chores and whose turn it was to deal with the leaky roof. They made love and made dinner and made plans for the future. It wasn't perfect. Ruby still had nightmares sometimes about losing the bakery. Kyle still went quiet when people stared at them in public. They both carried scars from the fight they'd survived. But they were building something real on top of the lies. Day by day, choice by choice. Spring arrived, and with it, news from the territorial capital. The Property Act was being challenged in court. Several women had banded together with a lawyer, arguing the law was discriminatory and unconstitutional. You should join them, Kyle said when Ruby showed him the newspaper article. I'm married. The law doesn't affect me anymore. But it affects other women, and you know better than anyone how unjust it is. Ruby read the article again. The women were asking for supporters, people willing to testify about how the law had impacted them, signatures for a petition, donations for legal fees. If I get involved, it draws attention to us, she said, to how we got married. Fletcher would love that. Probably. But hiding doesn't change anything. These women are fighting the same fight you fought, just more publicly. Ruby knew he was right. Still took her 3 days to decide. She wrote a letter to the lawyer listed in the article, told her story, the ultimatum, the desperate marriage, the appeal hearing, offered to testify if needed, sent it before she could change her mind. The response came within a week. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine Wells, wanted to meet. They met at the boarding house, Margot's neutral territory. Catherine was younger than Ruby expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and fierce eyes. Your story is exactly what we need, Catherine said after Ruby explained everything. A woman who was forced to marry to keep her business, who nearly lost everything because the system is rigged, who fought back and won. I won because I got lucky, because the appeals board had mercy. You won because you were honest, because you stood up and said the law was unjust. Catherine pulled out papers. We're building a case that the Property Act violates women's basic rights. that it forces women into marriages they don't want or strips them of property they earned. Your testimony would be powerful. It would also expose that my marriage started as fraud. Started as past tense. Catherine leaned forward. The fact that it became real, that you fell in love despite the circumstances, that's not a weakness in your story. It's the strength. It shows that even forced marriages can't erase women's agency, that love can exist alongside injustice. Ruby looked at Kyle, who'd insisted on coming despite this being her decision. He nodded slightly. What would I have to do? Ruby asked. Testify at the hearing in the Capitol. Tell your story publicly. Let us use it as evidence of the law's harm. Catherine's expression was serious. It won't be easy. You'll be questioned. Your marriage will be scrutinized. People will judge. People already judge. Not like this. This will be official, recorded, permanent. Ruby thought about the bakery, about the fight to keep it, about all the women who'd face the same choice she had, marry or lose everything. I'll do it, she said. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Ruby spent the time preparing testimony with Catherine, running through questions and answers until they were automatic. Kyle closed the smithy for 3 days to travel with her to the Capitol. The night before they left, Ruby stood in the bakery one last time, running her hands over the worn counters. Having second thoughts? Kyle asked from the doorway. About testifying? No. About everything else? Constantly. She turned to face him. What if this makes things worse? What if we open ourselves up to more scrutiny? Then we handle it, like we always do. He came closer. You're doing this for the right reasons. That matters. Does it? Or am I just making myself feel better about how we started? Maybe both. Is that so bad? Ruby leaned against him. I'm scared. I know, me too. He kissed the top of her head. But we're scared together. That's something. The Capitol was overwhelming, 3 times the size of Coldwater, full of noise and crowds and buildings taller than anything Ruby had seen. They stayed in a modest hotel near the courthouse, barely sleeping the night before the hearing. The courtroom was packed. Ruby recognized some of the women from the newspaper articles, shop owners and farmers and landholders who'd all been affected by the Property Act. Catherine was there with stacks of papers. And in the back, looking smug, sat Fletcher. Of course he'd come. Couldn't miss the chance to watch her publicly dissect her marriage. Ruby took the stand with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The judge, an older man with gray mutton chops and a severe expression, looked at her over his spectacles. State your name for the record. Ruby Calder. And you're here to testify regarding the Territorial Property Act? Yes, sir. Catherine stood. Mrs. Calder, please tell the court about your experience with the Property Act. Ruby took a breath and began. She told them about her father's bakery, about building it into something profitable, about the letter that said she had 60 days to marry or lose everything. She told them about Kyle, about the contract, about the lie that became real. She didn't hide anything. Told the truth exactly as it happened, including the parts that made her look desperate and foolish. So you committed marriage fraud, one of the opposing lawyers said during cross-examination. Yes, initially. And you're asking this court to overturn a law because you didn't want to comply with it? I'm asking this court to overturn a law that forces women to choose between their livelihoods and their autonomy. Whether I complied or not doesn't change that the law is unjust. But you did comply. You're married now. The law worked as intended. The law forced me into a legal contract I wasn't ready for. The fact that I fell in love with my husband doesn't make that force acceptable. Ruby's voice was steady. If I'd hated him, if the marriage had been miserable, would that make the law more just? Or would it just mean I suffered more for the same forced choice? The lawyer had no answer for that. After Ruby, other women testified. Stories of rushed marriages, lost businesses, forced dependency. Catherine wove them together into a pattern of systemic harm. The hearing lasted 2 days. When it was over, the judge said he'd issue a ruling within 6 weeks. Ruby and Kyle traveled home exhausted and wrung out. The train ride was quiet, both of them processing what had happened. You were incredible up there, Kyle said finally. I was terrified. I know, but you did it anyway. He took her hand. Whatever the judge decides, you stood up and told the truth. That matters. Does it change anything, though? Even if they overturn the law, our marriage still started the way it started. Yeah, and I'm glad it did. Because it brought you to me. Kael's thumb traced circles on her palm. I don't care how it started anymore. I only care about what it became. Ruby leaned her head on his shoulder as the train rattled through desert landscape. What did it become? Home. The words settled over her like a blanket. Home. Not just a place, but a person. A choice made every day to stay, to build, to love, despite the mess and complications. Yeah, she said quietly. Home. Back in Coldwater, life continued. The bakery needed running. The smithy had orders backed up. There was bread to bake and metal to shape, and a future to build while they waited for judges to decide their past. 4 weeks after the hearing, Margot burst into the bakery waving a newspaper. They did it! She shouted. The court overturned the Property Act. Ruby grabbed the paper with flour-covered hands. The headline screamed in bold letters. Territorial Property Act struck down as unconstitutional. She read the article 3 times, not quite believing it. The judge had ruled that laws restricting property ownership based on marital status violated women's fundamental rights. The Property Act was void. Women could own businesses and land regardless of whether they had husbands. We won, Ruby whispered. We won. Margot was laughing and crying at the same time. Every woman who was forced to marry, who lost their property, who bent themselves into knots to survive this bullshit law, we won. Ruby set down the paper and just breathed. They'd won. The system that had forced her into a desperate marriage had been declared unconstitutional. It was over. Except it wasn't really over. Not for her. That night, she and Kael sat on their porch step, the same place they'd sat that first night planning their fake marriage, and watched the stars. You could annul it now, Kael said quietly. The marriage. The reason you needed it doesn't exist anymore. Ruby's heart stuttered. Is that what you want? I want you to have a choice, real choice, not forced by laws or circumstances. He was staring at the stars, not looking at her. We got married because you had to. Now you don't have to. So the question is, do you want to? Want to what? Stay married. To me. His voice was carefully neutral. I love you. I want to build a life with you, but I want it to be because you choose it, not because you're stuck with it. Ruby stood up, pulling him to his feet. You're an idiot. What? I chose you months ago. The moment I decided to fight for this marriage instead of walking away. The moment I told the appeals board, I loved you. She grabbed his face, making him look at her. The law changing doesn't change how I feel. I don't want an annulment. I want you. I want this. I choose this. You're sure? I'm sure, you idiot. Ruby kissed him hard. I'm staying. We're staying. Together. Kael pulled her close and she felt tension drain from his shoulders. I was so afraid you'd leave. I know. I could hear it in your voice. She pulled back enough to see his face. I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever. You're stuck with me. Good. They stood on their porch, wrapped around each other while cold water settled into night around them. Somewhere in the distance, someone was celebrating, probably Margot, throwing an impromptu party for the ruling. But Ruby was content right here, in this moment, with this person. The next few weeks brought change. Women across the territory began filing to retain their properties without needing husbands. Some marriages that had been forced ended in quiet annulments. Others, like Ruby and Kael's, stayed intact because they'd become real. Fletcher left town, transferred to another posting, according to rumors. Ruby didn't ask where, didn't care. He was someone else's problem now. The Martinez family threw a dinner to celebrate, invited Ruby and Kael and half the town. Clara, now 7, had stopped having nightmares about the fire. Michael's garden was thriving. Anne was learning to bake. You gave us more than a place to stay, Maria said, pulling Ruby aside after dinner. You gave us hope. Showed us that people still help each other. You'd have done the same. Maybe. But you actually did it. That's the difference between thinking about kindness and practicing it. Maria squeezed her hand. Thank you for everything. That summer, Kyle officially bought the smithy from O'Connor's estate. The old man had died in his sleep, liver finally giving out, and his nephew had no interest in metalwork. The sale went through without complications. Ruby stood in the smithy watching Kyle sign the papers and felt tears burn her eyes. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd risked everything to achieve. And now it was real. How does it feel? She asked after the lawyer left. Strange, good, terrifying. Cale looked around the smithy, his smithy now, legally and completely. I keep waiting for someone to take it away. Nobody's taking anything. This is yours. You earned it. We earned it. He pulled her close. I couldn't have done this without you. Sure you could have. You'd have found another way. Maybe. But this way gave me you. So I'm glad it worked out how it did. Ruby smiled against his chest. Even the parts where we almost lost everything? Especially those parts. They taught us what we were fighting for. Fall arrived with cool winds and golden light. Ruby hired help at the bakery, a young woman named Sarah who needed work and had quick hands. Cale took on an apprentice, a quiet teenager who reminded Ruby of Kyle himself at that age. They were building something sustainable now, not just surviving, but thriving. 1 year after their wedding, they held a real ceremony. Not because they needed to, the legal marriage still stood, but because they wanted to mark the occasion properly, wanted to stand in front of everyone who'd watched them struggle and say vows that meant something this time. Pastor Williams officiated in the church where they'd first sat together, sparking all those rumors. The pews were packed, Margot and the Martinezes in the front row, Sarah and Kyle's apprentice standing as witnesses, half the town crowded in to see. Ruby wore a dress Margot had helped her make, simple white cotton with blue trim. Cale wore his good shirt and looked uncomfortable and perfect. They stood at the altar holding hands while Pastor Williams talked about love and commitment and the strength of choosing each other daily. Then came the vows. Ruby, Kyle said, voice steady despite his nervousness, a year ago I married you because I needed to. Today, I'm choosing you because I want to. You're stubborn and fierce, and you don't back down from fights even when you probably should. You make me want to be better, braver, more honest. He squeezed her hands. I love you. I choose you. Today and every day after. Ruby's throat was tight. Kyle, you walked into my life during my worst moment and became my best decision. You're quiet and patient, and you see things I miss. You make me feel safe enough to be scared, which might not make sense, but it's true. She smiled through tears. I love you. I choose you every single day. They kissed to applause and cheers, walked back down the aisle as husband and wife for the second time, but really for the first time that counted. The celebration lasted until midnight, dancing in the town square, food from every household, music from a traveling band that happened to be passing through. Ruby danced with Kyle and with Margot and with James Martinez and with half a dozen other people. Her feet hurt, and her face ached from smiling. Happy? Kyle asked during a slow dance as the night wound down. Exhausted, but yeah, happy. Ruby leaned against him. You? Same, minus the exhausted part. I could keep going. Show off. He laughed and spun her, making her dizzy in the best way. Later, walking home through quiet streets, Ruby felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For saying yes, a year ago, when I showed up at your smithy with a crazy plan. You're welcome, though I think I should be thanking you. Cale pulled her closer. You gave me more than a business. You gave me a life. We gave each other a life? Yeah, we did. They reached their house, their home, and stood on the porch looking at it. The place they'd shared first as strangers, then as reluctant partners, then as something neither had expected. It looked the same as always, but meant something different now. This was the foundation they'd built. Not perfect, not without cracks, but solid and real and theirs. Ready? Kyle asked, nodding toward the door. Ruby smiled. Ready. They went inside together, closing the door on the past and opening themselves to whatever came next. There would be challenges still. Life didn't stop being complicated just because you were happy, but they'd face it together, two people who'd started with lies and built something true. Years later, when people asked about their marriage, Ruby would tell them the truth, how it started as fraud, born from desperation and unjust laws, how it nearly fell apart a dozen times, how they fought for it anyway, choosing each other even when it would have been easier to quit. Some people judged, thought it was romantic but wrong, or wrong but understandable, or just plain scandalous. Ruby stopped caring what people thought. She had a bakery that was hers, a husband she loved, and a life she'd built with her own hands. That was enough, more than enough. Kale's smithy became known across 3 territories for quality work. Ruby's bakery expanded, took over the shop next door, hired 5 employees. They bought the house from the Smithy estate and made it truly theirs, adding a real garden where Michael's seedlings had started, fixing the roof properly, painting the walls colors they actually liked. They fought sometimes, about money and time and whose turn it was to deal with difficult customers. They made up more often, built a life that was messy and real and completely their own. 10 years after their wedding, the territorial government issued a formal apology for the Property Act, acknowledged the harm it had caused, set up a fund to compensate women who'd lost property. Ruby and Kale didn't apply for compensation. They'd gotten something better than money. They'd gotten each other. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on that same porch step where so much had begun. Ruby's head on Kale's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them watching the desert stars. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Ruby asked. "If I hadn't walked into your smithy that night?" "Sometimes, but I try not to dwell on alternate versions. This version is pretty good." "Just pretty good?" "Okay, it's perfect. You happy now?" Ruby laughed. "I'm always happy when you admit I'm right." "I didn't say you were right. I said our life is perfect." "Same thing." Kale kissed the top of her head. "You're impossible." "I know, but you love me anyway." "I do. Against all logic and reason, I really do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars wheel across the desert sky. The same stars that had looked down on them that first desperate night when they'd made a plan born from fear and necessity. The same stars that had witnessed every choice since, every fight and reconciliation, every moment of building something real from broken pieces. Ruby thought about that first night sometimes, how scared she'd been, how certain she was that this would be temporary, transactional, nothing more than survival. She'd been so wrong. This wasn't survival. This was living, actually living, not just getting through each day, but building towards something, creating a future together, one choice at a time. "Hey, Kale?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad it was you, that night. I'm glad I asked you and you said yes." Ruby's voice was quiet. "I can't imagine doing any of this with anyone else." "Me neither." His arm tightened around her. "You're stuck with me," Ruby called her. "Good." They stayed on the porch until late, talking about nothing and everything, making plans for tomorrow and next week and 10 years from now, making a life out of conversation and shared silence and the steady certainty that whatever came, they'd face it together. Eventually they went inside to bed, their bed, in their house, in the life they'd built from lies and desperation and unexpected love. Ruby fell asleep wrapped in Kale's arms, dreaming of bread rising and metal shaping and all the ordinary miracles of a well-lived life. In the morning, there would be work to do. The bakery to open, the smithy to run, 1,000 small tasks that made up their days. There would be challenges still, because life was never simple or easy. There would be joy, too, found in unexpected places. But tonight there was just this. 2 people who'd gambled everything on a lie and won something real. 2 people who'd chosen each other in the worst circumstances and kept choosing each other every day after. That was the real story. Not the desperate beginning or the dramatic appeals or the law changing, just 2 people, building a life, one choice at a time. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.